the American Action Forum talks about the Biden administration's regulatory agenda.
It's the Washington Journal for the first day of February. A recent poll conducted by the Associated Press showed less than half of Americans surveyed said they had a great deal of confidence in the scientific and medical communities. This survey measuring that view during the COVID-19 pandemic. The skepticism grew more divided among Republicans and Democrats who took part in the survey. In our program this morning, to start it off, we want to ask you if your own personal views on science and medicine have changed due to the COVID pandemic. Here's how you can let us know. If you say yes, those views have changed, call us at 202-748-8000 and tell us how. If you say no, those views have not changed, call us at 202-748-8001. Perhaps you are unsure.
What a great topic.
202-748-8002. You can text us those thoughts at 202-748-8003. Post on Facebook at facebook.com/cspan, and you can also go to our Twitter feed and post there too, at cspanwj. It was the Associated Press teaming up with the Center for Research, taking a look at this idea of trust in the scientific and medical communities. When that general overall confidence in those communities was taken amongst those who participated, 48% of those saying that they would say that they have a great deal, and that's how the poll expresses it, in those scientific and medical communities, and 45% saying that they have only some confidence in that, with very little saying they have hardly any. If you go and break it down by partisan views, 51% of Democrats who were surveyed during that time, 42% of Republicans said they had a great deal of confidence in the scientific community in 2018. When you go to 2021, that gap widened significantly to 30, with nearly 2/3 of Democrats expressing confidence in those scientific communities compared to 1/3 of Republicans. And then taking a look specifically at medicine, when you in that survey, only a little bit, 37%, 38% saying they had a great deal of confidence, some saying they only had some of confidence. And that's just some of the survey results that were taken by the Associated Press. This came, as far as trust in science and those issues, this came into play over the last few weeks over the podcaster Joe Rogan. It was a group of scientists and medical community people who sent a letter to the company Spotify about Mr. Rogan's podcast. And in that letter, they write in part this: throughout the pandemic, Joe Rogan has repeatedly spread misleading and false claims on his podcast, provoking distrust in science and medicine. He has discouraged vaccination in young people and children, and correctly claimed that mRNA vaccines are, quote, gene therapy, promoted off-label use of ivermectin to treat COVID-19 contrary to FDA warnings, and spread a number of unsubstantiated conspiracy theories. It goes on from there, including the fact that Mr. Rogan had hosted Dr. Robert Malone, who was suspended from Twitter for spreading misinformation about COVID. You probably saw in the news then in the most recent of days that Mr. Rogan apologizing for some of that content, specifically taking a look at the COVID and issues related to COVID, saying that he would take a better approach as far as how he chooses guests and those topics as well. So with that in mind, we want to ask you about that confidence, particularly that you might have in the science community, in the medical community, and if that confidence has been influenced by any way during the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, here's how you can let us know your thoughts this morning. If you say those yes, those views have changed, 202-748-8000. If you say no, 202-748-8001. And perhaps you are unsure about where you stand on that, 202-748-8003. You can also text us at 202-748-8003 as well. Some people posting on our Facebook page this morning when it comes to this topic, saying, Chris Chase from Facebook saying, yes, we need more education on science and medicine in schools, because clearly so many Republicans who doubt science and medical are a product of a lack of understanding in science and medicine in our schools and our education system. From Michelle Kilborn from our Facebook page saying, no, it's not changed my view of science or medicine. This experience has cemented my view of the abysmal state of U.S. education, however, and the people who so easily follow and mimic demagogues and gullibly believe irrational causes. Christina Baddock from Facebook saying, not when it comes to the true facts of science and medicine. I still don't trust the World Health Organization, the CDC, the government, or anyone pretending to have a medical degree. And then Marianne from Facebook saying, I'm more skeptical of scientific conclusions that might have a financial, political, or otherwise subjective motive. Again, Facebook is how you can post there if you want to share your thoughts this morning as well. On our yes line, as far as views changing on the science and medical communities because of COVID, this is Margaret in Leavenworth, Kansas. He's starting us off. Go ahead, tell us how those views have changed.
Hi, good morning. I have 30 years as an RN in this country, and I think our education is so behind in science, and it was very abysmal for me to see how dumb people are. I mean, you'd think our country would be smarter than this, and how somebody politicized an epidemic. That's very, very dangerous. So I think science and medicine is good, but I think our country, it should be embarrassed. I think if you took a survey of people, you'd find they're like fourth grade and what their understanding of the human body and how you spread diseases. I mean, it's woeful. So a lot of it, people need to get educated, not the internet, but real school, you know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Also on our yes line saying those views have changed of the science and medical communities. This is from Paul in New Albany, Indiana. Go ahead.
Well, I think COVID-19, I think things have changed for the positive. I think I see vaccines. We're developing more. We're developing more awareness. And I think we need to give it a little more time, but it's better than it was 2 years ago. And people are gradually getting better, and the word's getting around that vaccines are the way to go, and I do believe in mandates.
So when it comes to those specific changes, or at least the changes that you're expressing, it's in the as far as vaccine development process, or are there other things involved there too?
Well, I think it's vaccine development, but I think if you look on the news, like little children are becoming more aware of the disease than their parents. And I think that's where the future is the youth.
Okay, that's Paul there in Indiana, telling his thoughts about how he thinks things have changed, or his views have changed due to that. When people were surveyed about their own risk to COVID, it was the New York Times in a recent survey done of almost 1,500 adults saying, and the question was, how worried are you about becoming seriously sick from the coronavirus? 14% of Democrats saying very worried, 33% saying somewhat worried, not too worried at all, about 30%, and not at all at 22%. The same question posed to Republicans, 6% saying they're very worried about getting sick from coronavirus, 16% saying somewhat, not too worried at 24%, and then not at all at 52%. Again, you know, if you want to share your thoughts on your views of science and medicine, and if they've changed due to the pandemic, again, you can call us on our yes, no, or unsure lines. Jim from Wisconsin, also on our yes line. Hello, you're next up.
I incorrectly, I should be on the no line. I told the telephone operator that I made a mistake, but I'm on the, I was on the yes line, yes.
So you're saying no, your views haven't changed then?
No, they have changed.
Well, tell us how they've changed.
I don't like things being mandated from above, way above by the CDC and all that stuff. I think that everything should be done on a person-to-person basis with a doctor, and that there shouldn't be any, because how can they have any familiarity with what's going on with each individual person when they're mandating ivermectin and some of this other stuff can't be used I mean, it doesn't make any sense that everything is like remote control from an outside source. It just, I mean, no medicine's ever been like that I've ever heard of. That doctors are supposed to have a high degree of discretion in each individual patient, and all of a sudden they got their hands tied behind their back. I don't understand this.
So in the if you look at the science community in itself, the medical community itself, how much trust do you place in them as of today?
Well, I don't have any trust in this RNA vaccines, and Dr. Malone and all these people. He's the one that came up with the RNA vaccines. He's one of the chief people that made it. He talks against it. It's got a 55-year-old hold on medical information that we can't look into it for 55 years for the clinical trials. It's an experimental vaccine.
Okay.
I can't understand any of it.
This is on our Yes line. This is Cindy in Norwalk, Connecticut, asking about views on science and medicine, if they've changed due to COVID. Cindy, you're next. Hello.
Hi, good morning. I don't think it really helps when people try to say, oh, it's a Republican thing, Democrat thing, or you're stupid, you're not educated. I don't think that helps at all. I think it just makes people dig their heels in. The reason why my views have changed is, it's not so much the medicine per se. I feel like most of the medical community do honor their Hippocratic oath. But, there's just a lack of respect for people who are questioning it, just like people question anything, religion, what have you. I don't feel like I feel like it's a lot of it is big pharma pushing it. The whole Joe Rogan thing, I don't think he did anything wrong. I feel like the squashing of people that are questioning it make people suspicious.
And when you say questioning it, you're saying specifically questioning doctors about COVID or the science or medical professionals about COVID, that kind of thing?
I think it's more the institutions, the CDC. I think there's a lot of good doctors that would like to use some of the medications that maybe not ivermectin, but there's also the monoclonal antibodies, which there's a shortage of, and then there was the whole thing and they're calling it horse dewormer when it really wasn't. I mean, if you watch Joe Rogan interview with Sanjay Gupta, he doesn't always have what some people considered quacks. I mean, Dr. Malone is not a quack. I think we're demonizing formerly respected people in the medical community because they have a different opinion. So, it is right. The emails with Fauci show that they saw that this was engineered. When he talked to a bunch of scientists when this first came out, and he squashed it. They didn't want anybody to know that this was possibly an engineered virus. When there's things like that out there, it's going to cause suspicion. Whether you're educated, I don't care how, you could be highly educated and still be a little suspicious. And as far as polio vaccines, well, those actually
okay. Well, I'll stop you there only because it goes a little farther than what we're talking about. But Margaret is next up in Texas, in Kerrville, Texas. She says no, views haven't changed. Margaret, hello.
No, I haven't changed. I'm a critical thinker, which means I believe in science. What amazes me, all these people around who live within the results of science, and they like driving their cars, the stoves they use, but they don't think critically about it. And you don't have to, I may be highly educated, but a person doesn't have to be highly educated to be a critical thinker. You can learn it through.
Hey, man, I don't want you pushing no critical thinking on me, all right? I ain't here for none of your critical theories, right?
Life experience.
Yeah.
And like the first woman that was on,
smart lady, I think.
By the people who cannot think critically, cannot think reasonably one step at a time on what is going on and how how medicine's evolved.
Well, let me ask you this: when it comes specifically to when it comes to COVID-related issues, you said you think critically about the science. What science do you reference as far as thinking critically? What do you look at yourself?
Well, I believe in the science behind the vaccines. I believe the science behind Dr. Fauci, who's been in it for years and years and years in this environment. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, no, it's okay. You answered the question. There's a bit of a delay when you watch on television and everything else. When it comes to the vaccines themselves, news of yesterday saying it's the Food and Drug Administration granting full approval to Moderna's coronavirus vaccine. The agency announcing Monday that vaccine, known as Spikevax, was previously available under emergency use authorization and is the second coronavirus vaccine to get that full FDA approval. Pfizer and BioNTech's product was approved back in August. Views and if they've changed, views of the science and medical communities and if they've changed due to COVID. Alexander in Brooklyn says no. Alexander, good morning. You're next up.
Yes, hello, good morning. I mean, it's pretty sad just listening to some of the callers and their concerns. And I guess, just thinking about this as I was waiting, I think it's more about, what is the reflection of this country? I mean, this is a sick country. We have people with so many underlying conditions. And, when you think about the way that we eat, the way that we live our lives here, there would be hesitation to believe in the science and say, well, this vaccine is good for me. It's going to save my life. I spent 2 years in New York City in the middle of this, and I didn't even get sick. And I went 1 week to Arizona, 1 week, and I went to a bar for 10 minutes. There were no vaccine signs outside. They didn't even need vaccine cards, nothing. People just walked right in. The bartenders didn't even have masks. And I got sick. I'm literally in the last day of my quarantine in my studio in New York City.
So when you talk about your level of trust then in science and medicine, then what do you base that on?
Well, I'm basing it on, proof myself. Like, I got the vaccine, I got the booster shot, and for me, my case was mild, and it wasn't that hard. And I understand, if you haven't gotten this, for a lot of the things that people say out there, it could be too much. And you could say, well, no, I haven't gotten it, or, I don't trust the science, and then you get it. And then you understand. Okay. And then you're like, oh, my God, this is real. So, I mean, all I would say is I trust the science, and I just hope that people don't realize too late that, yes, vaccines do work, and hopefully you don't have to learn the hard way by somebody in your family passing away or you getting a very bad case of this.
So in the worlds of the scientific and medical community, if your views have changed on those communities because of COVID, that's what we're asking you to engage with us in this first hour. If you say yes, those views have changed, 202-748-8000. If you say no, that the views have not changed and you want to tell us why, 202-748-8001. And perhaps you are unsure, call us at 202-748-8003, much like Michael is calling from Washington, D.C. on our unsure line. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, sir. It's a blessing to be here with everything that's going on. And we got this war, we got this disease going on. It got people scared, man. I'm serious, man. I've been wanting to talk to a real political person for a long time.
Well, you're saying you're unsure of your views on the scientific and medical community. What do you mean by that?
I just believe that the science is going different directions depending on where you're getting the information from. Wherever you live is probably different from where I'm from, like the city and the country. You
see, that's the thing about science, is that we get to take out competing perspectives and we get to combat that with empirical data. So it's actually like science, the whole goal of science is to get everything down to one, one or two, or maybe like one theory, or not every, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like if you have a topic, a lot of people have different opinions about this topic. The idea of the science is to make it so that these opinions are more constructed in fact, create a pattern that follows a likely outcome that can possibly relate to a trend, things like that.
The California or the East Coast. It's like real confusing.
So as far as information that you seek, say, because of COVID, where do you look to for that?
I look to my own professionals around me, and we laugh at this shit for real.
Okay, that's Michael in Washington, D.C. Annenberg, the Annenberg Public Policy Center did a survey on its own, particularly taking a look at Dr. Anthony Fauci, clearly the face of the pandemic over these last couple of years, and his work at the CDC as well. It said that in the survey, it said Americans said battered by waves of COVID-19 and confusion over shifting government messages about it. Americans' confidence in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention declined in January, with drops both among groups of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents and Republican-leaning independents, according to the January survey. Confidence in the CDC is providing the public with trustworthy information about the means of preventing and treating COVID fell from 77% only 2 months ago in November of 2021 to 72% in January of 2022. In addition, the survey found for the first time a significant drop in confidence in Dr. Fauci, who, as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, has been the target of withering attacks in conservative media outlets throughout the nearly 2-year pandemic. Confidence in Fauci dropped to 65% in January of 2022, a statistically meaningful drop over the 9 months since April 2021, when it was 71%. Speaking of Dr. Fauci himself, he was on MSNBC last week, was asked about these questions of the lack of trust in science and public health. Here's part of his response.
The issue of restoring trust in the public health sector. There's been we've discussed this, you and I have. There are grifters, there are people that are intentionally trying to politicize this. But obviously there is a collective disappointment in public health. How do you want to fix this going forward? What are some things that you'd recommend in improving, whether it's the CDC's reputation, public health in general? I guess lessons learned in the communication part of things.
Well, I think you just said it. First of all, we have to stick with the science, and one of the treacheries of this, if you want to call it that, is that this is a moving target, and the public understandably expects a very consistent message that doesn't change. And in fact, when the virus, which has changed, let's just look at the facts, Chuck. We've had the original Wuhan strain, then we had Alpha, Beta, Delta, Omicron, each with a different bit of a characteristic to it. So things have changed. And with the change in the virus has come change in some of the scientific issues that have resulted in change in some recommendations. That's the reality. Could we have done better in communicating that? No doubt, Chuck. I think we all need to admit that and realize that. But the underlying reason for the change and some of the underlying reason for some of the communication issues is the fact that people need to recognize we're not dealing with a static target. We're dealing with a moving target. And I know that's so difficult for people to appreciate, but that's just what the reality is.
Again, that was Dr. Fauci on MSNBC, of course, on this program and on events from the White House. Plenty of Dr. Fauci and other medical officials talking about COVID over the last couple of years. If you want to get the collected works, so to speak, of what they've had to say about the pandemic over the last 2 years, I invite you to go to our website at cspan.org. When the president of this administration and the previous one held forums and briefings by medical communities, we taped them and archive them. Again, you can see them all at cspan.org. Talking about levels of trust in science and medicine, it was the AP, along with another research poll, asking people about this idea of confidence in the scientific community. 48% of those saying overall, when they were asked, showing a great deal of confidence. It breaks down to 64% of Democrats showing that confidence, 34% of Republicans. A 30-point gap. That's up 9 percentage points since 2018. Let's go to Chris in Texas on our Yes line. Hello. Chris in Texas? One more time for Chris in Texas. All right, we'll go to Max. Max in Mechanicsville, Maryland, on our no line. Good morning.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. This is a great question. You've put out there the split between the two different politics parties in this country and what they feel about science, which the two topics have nothing to do with one another. Nothing's changed about science. Without science, we wouldn't have phrenology. Without science, we wouldn't have eugenics. Without science, we wouldn't have the cure for the common cold or the cure for cancer. Without science, we certainly wouldn't have fentanyl out there. Science hasn't changed. What's changed is the way that scientists view themselves. Scientists now view themselves as infallible. Science has flip-flopped with the clergy of the church. You can't question the clergy of the church or you'll be excommunicated from the church. That's what's changed. Science is still the same flawed practice. It's still the method. It's still the the experimentation, and everything we believe about science today, by the time our kids have grandkids, it will all be laughed at because scientists will know more than what we know now.
So you're saying and calling it and saying that your views haven't changed. Is that the case?
Right. No, science is science. Science hasn't changed. I know exactly what science is. It's a method of finding out how the universe works. It's an enormous body of study. You can't just wrap it up into Republican and Democrat. What's changed are scientists and the way they view themselves in our society. That's what changed. We are elevating these people to something they don't deserve.
Do you think to that degree they should be listened to on these kind? He's gone. Let's go to Matthew. Matthew.
So I love that idea because it's basically we're saying that anybody who says they're a scientist is just saying things and none of it's getting tested and none of it's getting rebuked or refuted in their own fields, and academia isn't constantly criticizing and looking for every flaw in everyone's data all the time. This is the scrutiny of science. You're lucky, literally you're a whole, the goal of science is I took this thing that we all thought was one way and I proved that it's a different way. The whole goal of science is skepticism. It's not infallibility.
In Jeffersonville, Indiana, on our Yes line. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you.
You're on, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, my view has changed as being a type 1 diabetic. When the pandemic started, I was like everybody else, scared, because I had an autoimmune disease. And then I caught it. I wasn't vaccinated or nothing. I was in the hospital with diabetes issues in DKA when I caught it. And I didn't have any symptoms, no nothing, but I had no immune system, so it should have devastated me. So after that, my views did change a little bit, so I started diving into it more. And my big questions are, is all of these political people that are invested in these companies have hidden interests in all these pharmaceutical companies? So why aren't they being held accountable for stuff like that if they're making major decisions for all the population when they have hidden interests?
I'm kind of curious as to how autoimmune this guy is.
When you looked into backgrounds, so you focus specifically on the financial side of it, not necessarily the medical side of it, or at least as far as treatments and why you get COVID and how people experience COVID, that kind of thing.
Right, because after I caught COVID, and it should have killed me, I had no immune system. They said if I caught a common cold, it would kill me. But I caught Delta COVID, and I didn't even have a fever.
And you're looking in the medical background, what have you found? Or at least the financial background, what have you found?
Well, not very much because it's all hidden. It's all hidden through shell companies and stuff. That's why there's no accountability anymore. Nobody is held responsible for their actions, it seems like. You can go across the board with police and everybody across a whole bunch of endeavors, but now since we're dealing with a medical consequence in the public sector, and it's affecting everybody in the world, it's a little bit more on TV now, per se, than most things. So it's just the way I'm looking at it, all right, our country ordered 800 billion vaccines. If they charge $1 for them vaccine, that's $800 billion, which we all know they're not going to be $1. They're going to be a couple $100. So
Okay.
you're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars moving around over this.
Matthew in Indiana giving us his thoughts as well, looking at the financial background of it, to death tolls and the like. It was the Wall Street Journal this morning saying that according to federal authorities, they estimate that 987,456 more people have died since early 2020 than would have otherwise been expected based on long-term trends. People killed by coronavirus infections account for overwhelming majority of cases. Thousands more died from derivative causes like disruptions in their healthcare and spikes in overdoses. COVID-19 has left the same proportion of the population dead, about 0.3%, as did World War II, and in less time. Then you can find that in the Wall Street Journal. When it comes to views of science and medicine, and if those views have changed because of COVID. Lewis in Pensacola, New Jersey says no. Good morning.
Hey, Pedro. I haven't seen you in a bit. You look like you lost some weight. No, science, nothing has changed my view on science. The only thing that's changed my view, as the previous callers stated, how this virus has been politicized. That piece you just had with Fauci, the arrogance of that man explaining to us about how viruses change. Everybody knows that, but of course, according to him, we just can't grasp that. That's all I have to say, sir. Bye.
Lakeland, Florida, on our Unshore line. We'll hear from Lynn. Lynn, good morning.
Good morning. Well, I'm unsure because shortly after I got the Moderna shot, I noticed a huge lump on my neck, and it turned out to be a lymphoma. Since then, it has gradually decreased and is now showing very low active. However, I keep running into people who came down with some case of having cancer and having cancer of the breast, and it doesn't seem like there's any place to report it. So I'm reporting this now. The other thing is that when we see ads on television for drugs, they evidently are required to report possible side effects, and yet we hear nothing of any side effects having to do with any of these vaccines. And I am not going to get the booster because having been diagnosed,
we have seen a lot of side effects from these. We just don't, as far as long-term side effects, it's yet to be seen, but what about the long-term side effects of COVID is kind of the big, what about if you're going to do that? But initial reactions to the disease or to the vaccine include incredible fatigue, immense fatigue, soreness, stiffness, myocarditis, which is inflation of the arteries in your heart or whatever. That's another one, mild myocarditis, which sounds worse than it is really, because I don't know, the inflammation gets way worse if you get COVID. Yeah, there's even flu-like symptoms that get reported when you take the vaccine and stuff like that. We've had reactions. Everyone's talking about how it's either knocked them on their ass or that it hasn't. It's clearly having an effect on our bodies. But the long-term effects are, basically the long-term effects of every vaccine. You just don't get sick.
with the lymphoma that is being fed by my carotid artery, I'm certainly not going to take the chance of getting that cancer boosted and reactivated by the shot.
Yeah, because that's exactly how that works. God damn. Oh man, she needs some. I don't know what she needs, but obviously she's treating her lymphoma. That's way more important. She shouldn't be getting the shot anyway. Like if it has any if it has any risk of putting her in any worse situation or anything like that, like the mild, just the fatigue from getting the booster or something might be enough to get her really sick.
Although I do have to say that before I got the vaccine, I was worried about getting COVID. I'm 75. And after I got the 2 shots, I felt relieved. But of course, then when I had the cancer in my neck, I was not too relieved.
What convinced you to ultimately get the vaccine?
Well, because of my age, it was very
She's
simple to get.
semi-convinced that the vaccine caused her lymphoma, and that's amazing.
And I'm obese, so I didn't want to take the chance. I hadn't run into anybody who had COVID, except that my son's father-in-law, who's in his 80s, got it and was very sick. He was sent home from the hospital and seemed to be getting sicker and sicker. And so that he went back to the emergency room, and they said to him, well, are you taking your medicine for pneumonia? And he said, nobody ever told me I had pneumonia. I didn't know that I have pneumonia. They sent me home from the hospital with no medication. They said I was over Moderna. So there's all kinds of side effects that we're not hearing about from anybody, scientists or medical people.
There is reporting out, though, on some side effects. You would have to find that online, but to point you to the internet if you wanted to search that. About a half hour in of this question on if your views on science and medicine have changed due to COVID. You can call and let us know on 3 lines. If you say yes, the views have changed, you want to tell us why, 202-748-8000. If you say no, the views haven't changed, 202-748-8001. And if you are unsure, 202-748-8002. Text us at 202-748-8003. Rick up next in Los Angeles, California. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Just want to start off by saying I had a brother-in-law who died from getting that booster shot. It's the first time I ever heard of that, somebody dying from getting the booster shot.
First time I've heard about that, too.
You had a caller about 8 calls ago that called on the no line.
Tell me he had.
Yes, so he called on the yes line.
Tell me he had not 1, not 2, but 3 vaccine shots. And it's the 3rd one that did it to him. Well,
It's really a no. That's what happened. I believe that when you mix politics with science, you get political science, and that's what we have. As far as Dr.
Political
Fauci,
science is still science.
All
I mean, it's a different science, but still.
If you watch Fox News, they've been following this from day one. And they got all these emails showing that he knew this came from the lab as far back as March of 2020. But he's the funder of many of these scientists, and he got them to corroborate to say that this did not come from the lab. It came from nature, which is a total lie. And you listen to Jim Jordan and Rand Paul.
Sure, they're questioned all the time. They question them on several committee hearings, which you can watch on C-SPAN. As far as what specific views did you have about COVID at the beginning of it, and how has it changed?
Well, I believe it's gotten too political. It's become political science. You can't question it. They're on the side of the Democrats who are doing nothing but lying to us. They lied to us from Obamacare to now. They just constantly lie to get us in the cameras and lie to you straight, bold-facedly.
Okay. We'll go to Jana from Oak Ridge, Tennessee on our no line. Hello.
Good morning. I'd like to say I've lived in the world of science for a long time, and that the one thing that scientists love to do when they go to meetings is to prove each other wrong. And that is how eventually, little by little, they approximate the truth. The truth is out there. We don't always know what it is.
I like this lady.
You know, Pascal said that the truth does not begin to exist the minute we discover it. It's always out there, and we are always trying to find it. And when I was a teacher, which was for 20 years, my students would come and interview me and say, Miss Stats, what is your philosophy of life? And, what are you going to say? So I decided I'm going to say action causes reaction, and that people should double-check before they jump on the bandwagon of all these.
Well, let's start specifically then as far as your views of COVID going into it at the beginning and why they haven't changed. What were your views at the beginning?
Well, I heard about the article in The Lancet, which I heard about on C-SPAN, I think. And little by little, I realized this is probably a very serious situation, because I listened to what the scientists or the biologists had to say about their findings. And little by little, you find out this is really virulent. And just listen and double-check and double-check. And
how did you double-check that once you listened to it?
It's really bullshit, because scientists are constantly, like, science itself, especially right now, is constantly under this double standard of like, oh, we have to just accept everything that you say is truth, and you are obviously infallible, and then you get things wrong and you change the data, and now you're a liar. It's like, oh, we were wrong about this. We didn't, we weren't really right about, like, I don't know, like, what was the thing that everyone was all weird about? Oh yeah, people were saying, like, right off the bat with, like, vaccines, it's like, this is gonna stop COVID. We're not gonna, like, you're vaccinated, you stop spreading COVID. And then after a while, we figured out that's not true. And it's like, literally, just by, like, literally those tiny little changes of like, oh, we thought it was this, but now turns out it's more like this. Like, the data's pushing it toward that way. Gets people going, well, if it's one way this day, then it's one way another, then obviously we don't know. You guys are just mixing, you're just doing little political, you're just doing political parlor tricks so that we just have to listen to you. If one day up is down one day and down is up the next one, then the next thing you know, we're just going to be listening to everything you say for every single opinion. And like, it's like, bro, you got what you wanted. It's like, it's like earlier you were complaining about the fact that, oh, science is this infallible fucking, oh, we have to treat science like it's the church and we have to do everything that science says, but you're also not giving it the room to be wrong. So like, what is it gonna, it's honestly, if you're gonna put something in that vacuum of like, if you're right, you're an asshole, and if you're wrong, you're a liar, probably better to just be an asshole. At least someone will eventually listen to you.
Well, I read and I listen to C-SPAN and I listen to all the television stations that I have time for. And you listen to people like Dr. Fauci, who is a specialist, who knows more about these things than we do. And when people say he lied, I really think it is anecdotal and really tragic. People cannot double-check because they have not been alerted to the fact that the scientific method is the only thing that we really have to have hope in.
This lady's great.
Tiana there in Tennessee. One of the names you heard, especially connected with the Joe Rogan podcast, was Dr. Robert Malone. He spoke at a recent rally against vaccine mandates. That rally here in Washington, you can still see it on our website at cspan.org. But here's a portion of his presentation at the rally.
I come to you with an open heart as a physician committed to healing, bringing 3 simple words, each of which ring like bells in the soul of honest people.
Yo, look at this. Look at this hip. Look at this hip doctor. All right, look at this hot. This what is this? This is some boss bitch doctor energy right here. Like, holy cow.
Dignity, community. Integrity is a commitment to truth in what you say, how you live, how you treat others. Dignity flows from respect for ourselves, for each other, and for the world we live in. Community is what binds us together. to each other and gives our lives purpose and meaning. St. Augustine, the doctor of the Roman Catholic Church.
Everyone in all right, these 5 doctors behind him, they're the troopers. I mean, she looks like she's bundled up underneath. She might got a thick sweater under there, some scars, but like these guys are just coming out of work. All right? Like this guy right here, this should be the indicator telling you how fucking cold it is. He has his lab coat on. He's got his white doctor coat, but he's still wearing the puffy jacket. It's cold out here. Look at this guy's nose, his ears. It's all red, the cheeks.
Famously said, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself." Harry Truman, a warrior against war profiteering, something we could use more of now, famously said, "I just tell the truth and they think it's hell." These are my truths, and I believe they're self-evident. We should not have politicized the public health response to SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19.
Again, more of that event available at cspan.org. We'll hear from Michael, Seattle, Washington, on our No Line. Hi.
Hi. Thanks very much for taking my call. Can I say something about Neil Young, Joe Rogan?
If it's connected to what's going on as far as trust in science and medicine with COVID, sure.
I have stuff to say about that, too, just real quick.
Well, let's start with that then, and you can reverse
Okay,
it to
sure.
the other thing. Yeah.
Sure. Actually, I prefer to start with that. The lady was talking about critical thinking. For me, that means questioning everything. And then another lady was saying scientists challenging each other and trying to prove each other wrong. That, again, is what I'm saying, question everything. And for me, the American Medical Association and the U.S. government has been lying to me my entire life about the medical qualities of cannabis. And they've been saying that there's 0 medical qualities to cannabis. And you have to ask why, when they could have been helping hundreds of millions of people, children with epilepsy, on and on, cancer, so many different things.
And how that relates to your views to COVID?
Well, they've lied to me my whole life, so why wouldn't they be doing it now? They lied to me about cannabis because they could make a bigger profit off of it. That's the whole reason. So why wouldn't I question what they're doing now?
So as far as specifically as the medicine and science behind COVID, what are you questioning?
I'm questioning the entire medical
I know you said that, but specifically to COVID and science behind it, what are you questioning specifically, since you question everything?
My roommate of 20 years just tested positive for COVID 2 weeks ago. And I sat in the same room with him. He was fully vaccinated. I'm not vaccinated. I drove in the car with him. I ate my dinners in the same room with him, and I'm fine. So, yes, I question all of this science, which is what the job of being a critical thinker is.
And Joe Rogan and Spotify?
And Joe Rogan and Neil Young, the thing about it is that Neil Young owned he owes his entire career to freedom of speech. Back in the 70s when he wrote Rockin' in the Free World, he would not have wrote that if he was in China or Russia. And now he wants to shut down other people's free speech. And that's just wrong.
Okay. Michael in Seattle, Washington, talking about views on COVID, and particularly science and medicine and those worlds, and if they've changed because of COVID, in his case not. Edgar in Bridgeport, Connecticut, on our Yes line. Good morning. You're next.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Yes, my views have changed a lot, especially with the medical establishment we have now. Dr. Fauci has been caught lie after lie after lie, and we cannot trust this man.
It's so disappointing to hear when I don't necessarily believe it, but it's so disappointing to hear when people are like, yeah, my opinions have changed. I thought that medical stuff was okay, and I thought it could be trusted, and now I can't fucking trust science, and I can't trust doctors, and I can't trust anything. I don't even know what up is down is from anything anymore. Like, man, bro, it feels almost like disingenuous. I feel like all these people are saying it went from bad to worse, you know? Like, that's it. So it didn't really change. It went from skepticism to I lived in this world so long and tried to buffer myself from reality that I'm, convincing myself.
To lead us on this course. And I'm just saying, we have no confidence in leadership now because of what Dr. Fauci have done to us.
So is your concern more with the CDC and government officials, or is it with science and medicine themselves?
I'm concerned with with the whole establishment, with the CDC, with the FDA. They've been nothing but flip-flopping ever since this pandemic started. And Dr. Fauci has been caught lie after lie after lie. And like they said, if Dr. Malone, the inventor of mRNA, is saying it's dangerous, why wouldn't we listen to him? And it doesn't make no sense.
Okay,
and
that's Edgar in Connecticut. The New York Times talks about international opinion of science and medicine in a recent poll that was taken. It says the results come from the public opinion poll in a report published by the Wellcome Trust, a foundation focused on health research in London, showing about 80% of people from 113 countries said they trusted science either, quote, a lot or, quote, some. About 3/4 of the 119,000 surveyed said they trust scientists either, quote, a lot or some. Quote, I'm not surprised by the results of the survey, said Fatima Tokafeshan, a geneticist and science communicator who was not involved with the poll. She suggested that interdisciplinary responses to the pandemic among scientists in fields ranging from public health to immunology to zoology to epidemiology helped people to understand the connections between science and their own well-being. Quote, the general public may not know scientists in real life, but most people know a doctor or a nurse. Now everyone has at least heard of a scientist or read something by a scientist. Again, that's some of the international perspective when it comes to trust in science and medicine. Because of COVID, we're asking you the same to share your thoughts on it. As far as views are concerned, Chris says his views have changed. He or she is in Texas. Chris, good morning.
Good morning, Pedro. Can you hear me okay?
You are on. Go ahead.
Hello? Oh, excellent. Okay. Yes, the principles of science and medicine have not changed, but I think the profession has and the professionals. We now have a better idea of what providers are basically willing to accept wholesale whatever medical authorities say to be the truth. Even before COVID, though, I was concerned about the state of healthcare in our country. I think a lot of people would call our system, instead of healthcare, more of a sick care industry. And, that has to do with, pharmaceutical industries, the hospital systems, insurance industry, et cetera. But to me, it appears more so that the healthcare industry, there's a lot of parallels with the military-industrial complex as far as truthful information. And I'm most interested in those voices that are being censored by big tech and media big tech and the media overlords.
Voices such as who?
I look at. Well, so I really respect the opinions of, Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. McCullough. He's from the Houston area. He's affiliated with Baylor.
And so as far as the providers are concerned, specifically, how have your views changed because of COVID? I know you talked on a broad sense, but specifically, how have those views changed?
Well, the way I would choose providers now has changed. I'm interested in knowing, what my provider's opinions may be regarding COVID. That's a more of an individual point of view. On a broader sense, I'm concerned about the, where COVID came from, the origin of COVID, why we're dealing with this in the first place, and what we're going to do to prevent it from happening next time. I see a lot of parallels with 9/11 as this just being a massive event, and there's a lot of questions surrounding it. A lot of people don't trust the official story.
Okay.
I think that's a big.
Okay. Well, we'll leave you there, Chris. That's Chris in Texas. We will hear next from Kyle. Kyle in South Glens Falls, New York, on our No line.
Yes. Good morning, Pedro.
Morning.
My opinion on this whole thing is this: we live in a small piece of history, every part of humanity, and we had this horrible pandemic that came down in our lifetime. So we put our best scientists, our best medical people on finding us a vaccine. They did the best they can, and in good faith. We lost 60,000 people a year to the flu. We lost 900,000 people to COVID. I've lost 2 personal friends that did not get vaccinated, even though we pleaded with them. Younger men, 60, 57 years old, healthy. People, listen to the scientists. Listen to the doctors. These vaccinations are helping. They're saving lives. Other countries are begging for the vaccine, begging to save their populace.
Which doctors specifically are you listening to, or which scientists specifically are you listening to?
Well, I typically listen to, I do trust the CDC. I do trust Dr. Fauci. I do trust my own physicians and the doctors in my healthcare system. I can't find a doctor or anyone that tells me not to get vaccinated, sir. I don't listen to the guys on the street. I don't listen to construction workers. I don't listen to guys that search their cell phone on Facebook to find medical advice. I listen to guys like Fauci, who spent their entire career studying these problems. These aren't just guys. These aren't politicians. Fauci's not a politician, sir. Fauci is a man who dedicated his life to saving lives. And I hope everything's good, and thank you for letting me talk.
That's Kyle there in South Glens Falls, New York, giving his opinion. If you look at the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal this morning, it talks about what was commonly known as Operation Warp Speed in the previous administration. This is by Alyssa Finley, an editorial writer, a member of the editorial board, under the headline Operation Warp Speed Slowly Gets Its Due. She writes, the Warp Speed shifted the financial risk to government by placing orders for vaccines and therapies before they were authorized by the Food and Drug Administration or even shown to be effective. This encouraged pharmaceutical companies to expand manufacturing capacity so vaccines and therapies were ready to be distributed once they had the FDA's green light. Going on to say that Operation Warp Speed in July of 2020 announced a $450 million manufacturing and supply agreement with Regeneron for up to 300,000 doses for its experimental monoclonal antibody. A few months later, it ordered 300,000 doses of Eli Lilly's experimental antibody. The FDA granted the emergency use authorization to both treatments in November of 2020. Supply of those monoclonals exceeded demand last winter because many people were unaware of the treatments. Still, during the final 2 months of the Trump presidency, Operation Warp Speed ordered another 1.25 million doses of Regeneron and 650,000 of Eli Lilly's antibody treatments, leaving the Biden administration well supplied. Again, more of that if you want to read it there at the opinion section of the Wall Street Journal. A few more minutes about your views on COVID, if they've changed, views of science and medicine, if they've changed because of COVID. This is Josephine, Livingston, New Jersey. Good morning.
Good morning. My view of medicine hasn't changed in the sense that if you go to your doctor, you listen to your doctor. But on the other hand, as 2 examples, I have 2 family members.
What if he says to get the
both
shot?
have cancer. One has I can't even pronounce it. The other one has metastatic breast cancer. Any cancer hospital that you go to will automatically have you vaccinated. They don't ask you. And so you're saying to yourself, well, gee willikers, if these people are so ill and they think it's so important to be vaccinated, there has to be for them a good reason to protect their lives. It's just sad that we think today that we know more.
That's
than
really
they do.
nice.
I know you're all talking about Joe Rogan. I looked at this tattooed man. He's supposed to be the science. I don't know. I've never heard of this
I like this lady.
He's a podcaster host. No medical background as far as I know, but he's a podcaster host. But go ahead.
I mean, you look at, if he was on the street, think about it. If he was on the street with all those tattoos, I would say, what is he a criminal? I mean, this is what you're listening to? Now, as far as Dr. Fauci is concerned, the man was appointed in 1984 by Ronald Reagan. He's won so many awards for his contribution to science. He's never lied. Now, does science evolve? Of course it does. I mean, anybody who's ever been treated for cancer knows how well science has evolved. Thank God, to the better. So do we always trust your doctor? Of course not. You question when you go to your doctor. There's nothing wrong with that. But to say someone has lied, to say someone has gained money over it, look, you have to be an individual. You've got to act on your own. If you cannot think critically, and I did take science, I trust science because I studied it.
Okay. That's Josephine. That's Josephine in New Jersey giving her thoughts this morning. Let's hear from Daryl, Colfax, Washington State. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It goes well. Go ahead, sir. You're on.
Hey, well, I have changed my views considerably. Early on in the pandemic, we knew that it was spread through aerosols. Yet, have you ever seen an expert on aerosols talk about it? All we hear are people who really don't know that much about aerosols telling us how the disease is spread. And then initially, now
I'm pretty sure around the, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure around the beginning of this, when we were getting, for a while there, we were kind of grabbing a lot of different scientists to talk about how it works. And one of them was someone who, studies, the way things are spread through, aerosols.
Now we're to the fact that we do need the proper mask to wear to prevent aerosols from taking them in. And earlier, they're saying just wear anything you want over your face and you'll be fine. And then we've found since then that actually people are contracting the disease if they're not properly protected. There's been a lot of stuff that has been said that has changed in the last 2 years that was obvious initially when it came out. In 1918, we knew more about how to protect ourselves from that pandemic than we did today, knowing how to protect ourselves from this one. All the stupid rules initially in our state, we cut off fishing. I mean, how stupid is that? No better place to be than out fishing, Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yep, gotcha. That's Daryl there in Washington State. Larry from New Jersey texting us this morning saying that when it comes to views, it's given me hope for future episodes of Virus Is Yet to Come. He says more concerning are the anti-vaxxers and overwhelming of the healthcare system. You can text us at 202-748-8003 your thoughts on views and if they've changed, views of science and medicine, and if they've changed due to COVID. From Garland in Lufkin, Texas, says his views have not changed. Garland, hello.
Yeah, how you doing, Pedro?
I'm fine, thank you.
My views haven't changed. At first, when Trump was in there, I thought, he was doing that Jonestown thing by the Parliament. And so I changed when Biden got in there and started trying to get people help. So, I feel like, science, you have to go with the science and the doctors. I mean, like they say, the variant, the coronavirus it changes, and so they got to change too. And they giving us the best information that they can. But like Trump mother said, once he was in there, it wasn't going to be nothing but chaos, and it's still chaos today. And I thank you for taking
Well,
the call.
Dr. Fauci was part of the Trump administration and this administration. Did you trust him back then and now?
Yeah, I trusted him, but I didn't trust Trump because he was trying to stand up, but he didn't want to disrespect Trump, and he was trying to go along with it, but it was too much for him to take that he could sit there and just lie. That's why they took him off the TV for a while. And I've been watching this stuff since the beginning.
In Ohio, we will hear next from Paul in Painesville on our No line. Good morning.
Good morning. I had the COVID back in August of 2020 when it was first coming out, and I had taken the vaccine and the booster. Since then, science and medicine, you have to have some faith in science and medicine. I mean, the medications you take over the counter all go through some form of a clinical trial of sorts to see if it's safe for the general population. The individuals who may not want to take the vaccines and the boosters, I'm sure they're taking some type of a medication, whether it's prescribed by a physician or it's over the counter. And if it's not going through its regimen of testing, those medications, those antibiotics, the cancer treatments, people that take insulin for diabetes, all of those medications this particular vaccine certainly went through a speed up process for approval. But those medications that you and I take and everybody else takes to some level, some degree, goes through science and medicine. And if you want to take the approach of, God forbid, someone you come down with cancer, are you going to refuse chemo? It runs in the same clinical trials. Those individuals that decline to take, chemo for a cancer treatment or extend your life, if you take the opinion that science and medicine can't be trusted, then don't take the chemo, and then you would die within the time that the physician would say that you would end up dying from, because you're not taking the chemo to save your life.
Okay. So Paul there in Ohio sharing his thoughts this morning. By the way, the Senate panel today looks at the topic of COVID, but particularly when it deals with mental health issues and substance abuse issues as well. It will feature experts there. If you want to see that hearing, you can see it live, 10 o'clock today on C-SPAN 3, online at cspan.org. You can watch the full coverage of it on our new video app, C-SPAN Now. Let's hear from Gregory. Gregory in Silver Spring, Maryland, on our Yes line. Views have changed on science and medicine due to COVID. Hello.
Good morning, Pedro. This is a wonderful question. I think there's a distinction between the two as far as science and medicine and how it applies to where we're living today. In my opinion, Pedro, science is proof, while on the other hand, medicine is a way to believe any misconception. And that's the only
medicine's the result of the proof. Medicine is the proof, sort of.
We can't save ourselves any other way by checking back, looking into our own misconception.
What do you mean by that? Can you give me an example?
Okay, example of what?
The second point you made about medicine.
So, it's just a fancy way of saying that, medicine, ultimately, I think it's a way of finding out whether we're being misconstrued or correctly guided. And that's what the practice of medicine is all about. And I wanted to add to that faith, in my opinion, is completely out of the picture. It really is just between science, whether it being proof, substantiated, unsubstantiated, or medicine being a way to believe or prove or disprove any misconception.
Okay, we're going to hear from John, last call, North Hollywood, California, on our No line. Hello.
Hello, dear host Pedro Echeverria. Dear viewers, according to reliable sources, someone by name Chang Fung Ming from China intentionally spread coronavirus
Oh, it ended right there. Okay.
The American...
More. Open Phones Part 2. Electric Boogaloo. Okay. Where's the other college? Oh, there it is. Let's take a break. We'll because I promise
Their lives
we'll
and work.
look
Many
more
of our television
Russian
programs are
Insta.
also available
So-
as podcasts. You can find them all on the C-SPAN Now mobile app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Washington Journal continues.
Our first guest is Garry Kasparov, the chairman of the Renew Democracy Initiative. He's the author of Winter is Coming, Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. Mr. Kasparov, thanks for giving us your time today.
Thank you for inviting me. Good morning.
You, on a tweet announcing your appearance on this program, you wrote this. You said, extensive talk about Ukraine. Stop seeing this as a Ukraine problem. There will always be a Belarus or Ukraine or Syria problem if the Putin problem isn't dealt with. Could you expand on that, particularly as what you're seeing play out between Russia and Ukraine and the United States?
Yeah, I think that's very important to understand that we are talking about Putin's problem. And Putin is causing troubles in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Syria, in Venezuela, in many African countries. It's a long list. And we don't have even to look for more evidence, but just listening to Putin's own words. 15 years ago, in Munich, at the Security Conference in Europe, Putin made a very clear statement about his geopolitical intentions. He talked about return to the time of the spheres of influence. He claimed that Russia would be entitled to control not only former Soviet republics, directly or indirectly, but also return to its dominant position in Eastern Europe. And since nobody wanted to believe him, that's quite tragic because we had experience in the 20th century not believing dictators, so he followed up with his program. Next year in 2008, he attacked the Republic of Georgia, annexing part of its territory. 6 years ago, 6 years after that, 8 years ago, in 2014, he annexed Crimea. Also started a war in eastern Ukraine, and only heroic resistance of Ukrainians prevented him from taking bigger chunks of Ukrainian territory. And also he had, he appeared, or actually reappeared in many parts of the world, like in Syria, where he propped up Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. Maduro survived exclusively because of direct support from Russia, and now we could see Putin's paramilitary and oligarchs boosting their activities across African continent. So again, it's all about Putin, and I think it's time to recognize that Putin is an existential threat, not just to America or Europe or Ukraine, it's to the very principle of the free world, because he does not believe in self-determination, he does not believe in individual freedom. What he thinks should happen is just his division of the world between free and unfree, and people like him, dictators and thugs and terrorists, are in their rights to exploit people they control, and nobody should intervene with their criminal activities.
You also wrote about what's going on currently. You said this: sanctions and other measures must come now before Putin invades again, not after. If he doesn't believe you will ever call his bluff, it's not really a bluff at all. Talk about this idea of a sanctions approach to dealing with Russia and Ukraine, and how effective you think that might be.
Look, when we hear word sanctions, it's people getting confused because they think, oh, sanctions. The sanctions have been implemented 8 years ago, and these sanctions never worked. Look, there are sanctions and sanctions. Naturally, sanctions that have been imposed on Russia after annexation of Crimea, it's more like a lip service to public opinion, and they never touched Putin's, the foundation of Putin's power. You can simply look at the number of Russian billionaires in the Forbes list. It keeps increasing all the time. And no matter what former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, told us about Europe's united position against Russian aggression, at the end of the day, what matters to Putin, it's the amount of Russian gas Germany kept buying, and it doubled since 2014. So now I believe that we have to make sure that Putin recognizes that the price of further aggression could be prohibitive. The cost could be too high for him, and it's not just making threats. It's about making laws that will convince him that this time America and Europe are serious. And even if we're not ready to implement sanctions against Putin personally and his oligarchs and against companies like Gazprom and Russian financial system, it should be put in a bill. It's and these sanctions will trigger automatically if he does this or that. Right now, there's a big talk, but I think there's very little to convince Putin that this time the price of or the cost of his aggression would be prohibitive.
Republicans 202-748-8001, Democrats 202-748-8000, Independents 202-748-8002. You can text us at 202-748-8003 for our guest. Mr. Kasparov, it was yesterday at the United Nations Security Council that both the Russian diplomat there, the ambassador, and also heard from the American ambassador to the United Nations about the events there. I want to play a little bit of what she had to say about the situation, get your response to it.
In all of these talks, our messages have been clear and consistent. We seek the path of peace. We seek the path of dialogue. We do not want confrontation, but we will be decisive, swift, and united should Russia further invade Ukraine. We continue to believe there is a diplomatic path out of the crisis caused by Russia's unprovoked military buildup. We're working to pursue diplomacy in every possible venue. But we also know that diplomacy will not succeed in an atmosphere of threat and military escalation. That is why we have brought this situation before the Security Council today. The United States has been clear. If this is truly about Russia's security concerns in Europe, we're offering them an opportunity to address these concerns at the negotiating table. The test of Russia's good faith in the coming days and weeks is whether they will come to that table and stay at that table until we reach an understanding. If they refuse to do so, the world will know why and who is responsible.
That was Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the ambassador to the United Nations, talking about the U.S. approach as they see it. Mr. Kasparov, what do you think of that approach?
That's some empty words.
Oh, it's good to hear that now instead of saying if Putin invades, they say if he further invades, because that's a correct statement since Putin had invaded Ukraine already in 2014. Yeah,
we always kind of forget
I'm not
that.
sure that Putin is very much impressed because the American administration is still talking about some mythical Russian security concerns. No one is threatening Russia. NATO is a defensive alliance, and thinking that Baltic states could represent any threat to Russian security is absolute nonsense. It's Russia that has been threatening all these countries, and by invading Republic of Georgia and Ukraine, it just proved that Eastern European nations that have been suffering under Soviet occupation for more than 4 decades, they rushed into NATO just to have a defensive umbrella. And hearing this outcries in Russian media, which is totally under Kremlin control, and I'm just listening just to give an idea what's being told to people in Russia. So, and about flying time for missiles from Ukraine to Russia, and that could be a huge threat to Russian security. Absolute nonsense. Estonia is much closer to Russia than Ukraine. It's 100 miles or so from Tallinn to St. Petersburg. So, and Estonia is a member of NATO from 2003. And I never heard about any aggressive acts from Estonia. What we know that in 2007, Russia launched a major cyber attack on Estonia for a couple of days, paralyzing the entire critical infrastructure of Estonian state. So it's a one-way street, and the threat comes from Putin. Yes, bringing him to the table, diplomatic table, is a good idea because it can save lives, and that's top priority. But again, it's not just about offering him some goodies. It's about demonstrating that America is back as a leader of the free world and is ready for decisive action. I'm still not hearing this from U.S. administration. I would say that there's missing steel in their voice, and that's what Putin may get wrong. And if, God forbid, he gets it wrong and he crosses a demarcation line and pushes his tanks into Ukrainian territory, it will be a first major conventional war in Europe since the end of the World War II, and it will lead to massive casualties on both sides.
And as far as the strongest hand that the U.S. could play, as you talked about it, what would that look like?
You could look at Great Britain. The foreign minister, Liz Truss, she made a very strong statement about going after Russian oligarchs and their illicit wealth in the UK, and it caused panic in Moscow. They are now shouting. You hear outcries, threats to Great Britain, and of course, America has more leverage. If America decides to join Great Britain and to push other European allies to announce immediate sanctions. I'm not saying do it now, though I think it's long overdue, but to make clear that any aggressive act from Putin will immediately trigger sanctions, not new consultations, not debates how we do that, because the bureaucratic process is long, and Putin knows that. And if his tanks are deep in Ukrainian territory, they're not going to turn back because of sanctions. So right now it's time. It's to announce a very clear package of sanctions that will hurt Putin personally, Putin's oligarchs, and the most vital parts of Putin's economy. I say Putin's economy because it's all about oil and gas and natural resources. Russia. It's very unfortunate that Russia, my country, that was known for its brilliance, now it's reduced to be a petrostate.
Our guest is the chairman of the Renew Democracy Initiative. Mr. Kasparov, what is that?
Renew Democracy Initiative, it's an organization that I founded in 2017 after this very important elections in 2016 and rise of Donald Trump, and also the elections that brought two very unpopular candidates to contest the presidency. I joke that it was amazing that two candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, had a combined negative rating of 120%. I thought that Americans had to recognize the value of their democracy, because it seems to me that many things have been taken for granted. And I wanted to share my experience and experience of people like me to point out at the danger of rising extremism on both sides. And now we see that this country is dealing with two illiberal trends. On one side, on the right, you have cult of personality, and on the left, you have cult of ideology. And these two illiberal trends competing against each other, fighting each other, leads to the decimation of the political center. And the board of RDI actually reflects, this non-partisan approach. The two members of the board, the former Democratic senators, Bob Kerrey from Nebraska and Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota. Also, we have Michael Steele, the former head of RNC, and we have retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Windman, and many other people who just look at these issues, not from the partisans' point of view, but from just its global perspective. And I also trying to utilize my own experience as a dissident and also chairman of Human Rights Foundation, bringing dissidents from other places to tell Americans, especially young Americans, how to fight for democracy, and also to recognize all the threats to democracy, no matter whether they comes from far left or far right.
Our guest also came to claim to fame was he became the under-18 chess champion of the USSR at the age of 12. At the age of 22, he was the youngest world chess champion in the history by 1985. Garry Kasparov, our guest. We have a tweet from a viewer. This is Mark Stone, Mr. Kasparov, who says NATO will do nothing because European countries need Russian oil and natural gas, and the U.S. might because of the Ukraine-Biden relationship.
Oh, yeah, that's we hear every night on Tucker Carlson. This point of view. Let's start with Russian oil and gas. It's actually more about gas, and it's correct that Europe buys nearly 1/3 of its natural gas consumption from Russia, but Russia sells 80% of its gas export to Europe. And it's absolute nonsense that Russia could reverse the pipeline and sell it to China, because there's no pipeline that could take this amount of gas and compensate Russia for losing European market. Europe has a leverage, but unfortunately, over 16 years of Angela Merkel's leadership in Germany, Europe did absolutely nothing. Moreover, even killed potential projects that could replace Russian gas. And of course, German decision to end the use of nuclear energy, nuclear plants in 2011 after a Fukushima disaster in Japan increased this dependence. And as for America and Ukraine, look, it's there's a big talk about Biden-Ukraine relations. What I know, it's a Trump-Ukraine relations, and Trump's attempts to get some dirt on Biden from Ukrainian presidents in exchange for political support. And what America is defending in Ukraine, and we're not talking about boots on the ground. We're talking about military support, political support, diplomatic support. It's the world order that secured peace in Europe since 1945. Further violation of Ukrainian sovereignty, it's not just about Ukraine. It's like Czechoslovakia in 1938 was not just about Sudetenland. It's about global peace. And thinking that, who cares about Ukraine? But then, next will be Taiwan. And I want to hear, whether the same people say, we can sacrifice Taiwan, because don't tell me that Xi Jinping is not watching now very closely what's happening there and learning whether he can take his chance and attack Taiwan. So it's about sending an unequivocal message to all dictators, thugs, and terrorists that they will be met by decisive response from the free world led by the United States. It's very unfortunate that 4 American administrations didn't want to hear what Putin said in 2007, back in 2007, 15 years ago, and in Munich. Otherwise, I thought they could act decisively much earlier, and it will be easier, because what we know from history, while dealing with dictators, that every day of us delaying decisions, of us not demonstrating our readiness to fight, so simply puts the price up. Price goes up, and if we lose this Ukrainian battle today, then next will be test for NATO countries. And we already hear noises from the same quarters that why should we fight for Estonia? Why should we fight for countries that we cannot find on the map? Exactly what Neville Chamberlain said in 1938. But the end of NATO turns America into a paper tiger. And by the way, America enjoys its global economic dominance because dollar is a reserve currency. And why dollar is a reserve currency? Not because it's strong, because it's stronger than others. It's relatively strong, and America's role in the world is being recognized. So if you think that you can, do America first and ignoring American responsibilities to be part of the global solutions around our planet, so you're wrong. Because weakening America means eventually that you will have problems, both economic and political, at home.
What did you make of the Ukrainian president basically telling the West to calm down, that we're fanning the flames as far as this conflict is concerned?
Look, if you're a Ukrainian president, you don't want your people to panic. And naturally, he's trying to keep calm in the country, because it's not clear whether Putin will attack. So we don't know. I wonder if Putin knows himself. Clearly, when you're listening to Russian foreign minister and other Putin's henchmen, they also don't know. I'm listening to the statements both in English and in Russian, and Russian propaganda machine, which is, by the way, for 24/7. It's for many years. They have been attacking Ukraine, denying Ukraine's rights to be a sovereign state. So that's why the idea of ruining Ukraine's sovereignty was always in Putin's mind, because he knew that democratic, prosperous, independent Ukraine as a Russian neighbor could be the deadly threat to his kleptocratic fascist regime. So it's would be same as as Tunisian revolt that sparked Arab Spring. But
I'd be really interested in, I don't know, you don't get a lot of like common Ukrainian perspectives on like what's happening right now. Like at least, not so far. Because like this is a really similar situation with like the Taiwan-China situation. Like we have big countries trying to absorb these little sovereign states. And the issue is that these sovereign nations want to be their own countries, but they also have a lot of cultural ties back to these things. Taiwan was China at one point. Ukraine was Russia at one point. So it's like, a lot of like, for instance, like I've been watching Dylan Burns, and he's claiming that a lot of the reports of like, if you're gonna ask like a person in Taiwan, like, are you Chinese, are you Taiwanese, a lot of them say both, because they have a lot of cultural ties to both. And so it makes me wonder if that's kind of like a similar situation with Ukraine or not.
Ukraine is so close to Russia. It's the ties, economic, political, cultural ties over centuries. It will definitely send a message.
And, another thing is like both these countries will say, "Oh, Ukraine wants to be part of part of Russia." Like that's what happened in 2014. Like Putin came in, and like all the news reports that you had on the situation, he was like, they asked me to come. They wanted us. When we came into Ukraine, they cheered that Russian soldiers were there and stuff like that. Which I'm not even sure. It may or may not be true. But like, there's like a really like, these two things are not mutually exclusive ideas, and there's like a nugget of truth that isn't really being talked about that sits with like the people of Ukraine right now.
In the free world without suffering from the iron fist of a dictator. So Putin's goal is, and will be to remove this potential threat as a sovereign Ukrainian democratic state from the map. And Zelensky knows that he has to make sure that his country keeps functioning and not living under this hysteria all the time. But at the same time, they are, as far as I know, they are preparing for war. And thanks to some of the NATO countries like Great Britain and Poland and Baltic states, and of course the United States, now Ukrainian army is being armed and receives weapons that could put the cost of further Russian invasion too high for Putin. And by the way, speaking about the Ukrainian president, it's quite amazing to hear the outcries of Russian propaganda calling Ukraine a fascist state. They in all sorts of accusations about dictatorship. Zelensky is a Jew. It's to have a Jewish president, and they had before Jewish prime minister. So it just demonstrates that Ukraine it's dealt decisively with its past, and now it's a democratic state that that elects their leaders based on their merits and ability to lead the country rather than on race or nationality.
Garry Kasparov joining us for this discussion. You can call in and ask him questions if you wish on the lines, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and Independents, 202-748-8002. You can text us at 202-748-8003. Mr. Kasparov, you were talking about accusations. Those came from the Russian ambassador at the UN himself yesterday during that UN Security Council meeting. I want you to play a little bit of what he had to say and get your response.
Western colleagues are talking about the need for de-escalation. However, first and foremost, they themselves are whipping up tensions and rhetoric and are provoking escalation. The discussions about a threat of war is provocative in and of itself. You are almost calling for this. You want it to happen. You're waiting for it to happen, as if you want to make your words become a reality. This is despite the fact that we...
I gotta wonder if people just like wear masks wrong on purpose or some shit. This is ridiculous. All this dude has to do is just, and he's got his chin. You know, now I think about it, that would probably be really uncomfortable. You having like a fucking bird neck like this guy, and like you gotta cover that with a mask. It's gonna get big, sweaty, big quick. Anyway, how fucking fun would that be if you're talking to someone and you're like, hey, being kind of mean, we don't want to like send you to the principal or call the cops on you or anything like that. You know, please stop being mean to this person. And then that person goes, wow, really? You just even threatening that is like in and of itself like pushing me to the brink of needing to actually hurt this person. Like, come on, man. You're my back's against the wall here. You're leaving me no other choice. It's like, bro, how do you push yourself into this situation? How do you move the chess piece and now say that you're actually back again, like that your chess piece is at the back in the corner, you know?
Are constantly rejecting these allegations.
Mr. Kasparov, his use of rhetoric in that situation, what do you think of it?
Words are cheap. You know, you should look at actions. The whole conflict began with Russia massing up troops on the Ukrainian border. We have way over 100,000 Russian troops brought from different parts of the country, massing up, you know, both on the east of Ukraine and also in Belarus, which is much closer to Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. So these troops are there. And what are they doing there? So if there are no troops, nobody would talk about it. So it's typical for every dictator, you know, they talk peace, but they're preparing for war and they're looking for the opportunity to have further gains. And as I said, you know, Putin never stopped thinking about destroying Ukraine. You have to listen not to this mouthpiece of Russian propaganda in the United Nations, but just listen to what Russian propaganda is saying in Russia. As I said, 24/7. You can hear the same story, that Ukraine is a failed state. This is the state that should be divided between, you know, just Russia and some Poland, and this state, you know, it's a threat to Russia, while Ukraine suffered from Russian aggression. So the Russia annexed Crimea, and by the way, speaking about annexation of Crimea, something that people should recognize: Ukraine in 1994 signed under American pressure, by the way, signed so-called Budapest Memorandum, which was a very important document. I couldn't deny this fact, because since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the nuclear warheads, they have been spread across former Soviet Union. Most of them were in Russia, then Ukraine, and a little bit in Belarus and Kazakhstan. And I understand why American administration, alongside with Brits, wanted this nuclear arsenal to be brought to only one country, Russia, to prevent nuclear proliferation. But Ukraine had, at that time, the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. They had more nuclear warheads than China, France, and Britain combined, nearly 2,000 warheads. And this nuclear arsenal had been given to Russia under conditions that Ukrainian territorial integrity will be protected. That was a guarantee signed by Americans, Brits, Russians, of course, Boris Yeltsin, and eventually France and China joined, and the problem of nuclear proliferation was solved. And since 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia and Ukraine signed numerous treaties that Boris Yeltsin signed, the first Russian president, Vladimir Putin, then his shadow president, Dmitry Medvedev, again Putin, ratified by many Russian parliaments, consecutive Russian parliaments. And never in 23 years, since 1991 to 2014, Russia...
I love that fucking Putin openly has a shadow president, and, like, no one cares. Like, it hasn't changed a damn thing.
Russia made a single territorial claim to Ukraine. So Crimean annexation had no diplomatic backup. Just Putin decided it was a time to grab this territory, and it's important to remember that it was the first forced change of borders in Europe since 1945, and again since Putin saw no real actions from the free world, he paid no price for his aggression. He decided that he could go even further. Dictators never ask why; they always ask why not.
We have some calls lined up for you. It's Iris in Michigan, independent line. You're on with our guest, Gary Kasparov. Go ahead.
Hi there. At least I saw a member of the Russian government come here as an ambassador to the UN and sit down and spell out their case. And I was just wondering what percentage of the people who immigrated to the United States are from the Russian sector as compared to the Ukrainian sector, and wasn't Ukraine part of Russia? And didn't Russia have our backs in World War II and fight with us against what was going on with the concentration camps? We left, they came, they drove their tanks in and told the people, according to Schindler's List and American history, that they told people that the war was over, and we just cut and run. And how many American lives have to be lost in order to bring some kind of control, not peace, into an area of the world that constantly wants to be embattled? How many American lives are going to be lost? How many widows? How many orphans? How many American graves we won't even see because we can't even bury our dead from COVID? And when is this insanity going to stop?
Okay.
When we keep sending...
Okay. Caller, thank you.
Again, it's a very emotional speech. Unfortunately, it's wrong on probably every historical count. So Ukraine was a part of Russian Empire, but speaking to Ukrainians, they can point out you to many tragic moments in Ukrainian history. One of these, Holodomor, when at least 3 million Ukrainians have been starved to death by Stalin policy to destroy Ukrainian, the push for Ukrainian independence. That's in the 30s. There was the ongoing history. So over just, it's a long period of time when Ukrainians fought for independence, and they got it back. They got it in 1991. Yes, I grew up in the former Soviet Union, actually born in the south of the USSR in the Republic of Azerbaijan, then moved to Moscow after the collapse of the Soviet Union, since Russian is my native tongue. And I had to stay in Russian capital after the collapse of the Soviet Empire. But now I was a bit confused by hearing the same propaganda point. Again, that reminds me of Tucker Carlson. So America is not sending troops to Ukraine. There are no boots on the ground. I mean, stop repeating this lie. All that's being asked, for America to support Ukraine militarily, sending weapons, lethal weapons, and other forms of help. No boots on the ground. No Americans going to die in Ukraine or Eastern Europe. Now, if you don't defend Ukraine, then you may actually see the challenge to NATO countries, and then America has an obligation to defend them. So you don't want to have this crisis in Estonia or Latvia, NATO countries, where America has two choices. Either you defend them or you walk away, and then you are paper tiger. And by the way, Taiwan is the next one. I already pointed out. Please listen to that. So again, you want to give up Taiwan to China? Fine. Then America, you'll be America first and America last. Because America's greatness was based on its global role. So people like me and millions and millions of people today look at America as a beacon of hope and a country that emphasized freedom and opportunities. And it's pretending that America could become great.
America first means America last. This is a world operation now, all right? It's like... America's a big country, but we got everything we need here. And while we're sitting here worrying about ourselves, everyone's going to be moving chess pieces on the board. It's like when you play Monopoly and you get Boardwalk, you get the dark blue pieces. Are you going to call it good after you just get the dark blue pieces and let every other member of the team grab every other piece of the board? I don't know, probably not. Now, we're not trying, I don't think imperialism is the whole goal of America. I think we like people to be their own sovereign nations, and especially if they're going to trade with us. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bigger countries who don't have the same ideological foundations as we do and are perfectly okay with just, I don't know, doing what they need to control what they want.
Without continuing its global leadership, it's wrong. It's naive. And again, please stop talking about a loss of American lives. Yes, and don't mention COVID to me. My mother died from COVID, so on Christmas night in Moscow, and I'm living in exile. I couldn't even be with her when it did happen. So, madam, I understand your frustration. But speaking about COVID, it makes me cry.
Steve in Baltimore, Maryland, Democrats line, you're next up.
My question is how do we lop the heads off of dictators? The United Nations and the Geneva Conventions are toothless critters. If we could go ahead and limit ourselves by lopping the head off the snake, then we would be better. So that would go against everything in the United Nations Geneva Convention. How do we get rid of dictators that are, as you said, want to expand to grab landmass? And I couldn't agree more with you that I think Russia and China are actually in cohorts working together. So while we're getting pulled up in this direction, we're also going to be pulled down into China, into Taiwan. That spreads the United States out awfully thin. And then where are we going to be? So how do we lop the head? And my question would be, why don't Russians lop the head off of Putin? What is the problem? Why can't we go ahead? And I know it goes against all laws, but remember.
Yeah, it makes you think, it's like, it's almost like dictatorial governments don't care if you like them or not.
They're toothless organizations. The United Nations and the Geneva Convention are toothless organizations. And if they weren't toothless organizations, then we should be able to say and come to all agreements, since it's the United Nations, hey, this SOB's got to go, and this SOB's got to go.
Okay. Caller, thanks.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. It's a very important reminder about the toothless organizations. But they have been built for a very different purpose. United Nations was a brainchild of FDR, and the idea of the organization was to prevent another world war. And it did work. At the end of the day, it was built to freeze conflicts, because everybody knew after 1945 that the next war could be a conflict between American and Soviet blocs. And the compromise had to be found to avoid nuclear Armageddon. And we were at one point in 1962, during the Caribbean crisis, were close. But thanks to the United Nations and to diplomacy, it has been prevented. But since 1991, United Nations became obsolete, because the organization that was built to freeze conflicts all of a sudden now turned into something that it was not supposed to be. They try to solve problems, but you cannot solve problems in an organization where everybody has one voice. And you have democracies and dictators getting together. Every week in September, it's in pre-COVID time, we had 1 week of United Nations General Assembly, and I call it, it's at the catwalk for dictators. The city is being paralyzed, and you have all dictators from all over the world gathering here to boast about their achievements. And when you look at the United Nations commissions, it's just a laughing stock. You have the Commission on Human Rights that spends most of the time criticizing Israel, and you have countries like Saudi Arabia talking about women's rights. And just to make the whole mockery of United Nations, recently the country that is appointed the chairman of the Commission of about weapons. So that's how to reduce the number of weapons in the world. It's North Korea. It's mind-boggling. North Korea. It's the country that has been using extensively, by the way, using Russian technology to build its nuclear missiles. Now it's the chair of UN Commission to actually to prevent the further spread of these weapons around the world. So I agree with you, and I could only say that late Senator John McCain was right talking about League of Democracies. So it's very important that America builds an entity that brings countries not only paying lip service to democratic principles, but acting upon them. And it's long overdue, because relying on United Nations and all its agencies doesn't make any sense. Russia and other dictators, they know how to abuse them and to work these agencies in their favor. And simply know the majority of the countries in the world, they follow Russia or China, because for dictators there are no rules. They can bribe their way in. They can buy favors and twist hands. Something that America, because of the laws of the land, cannot afford.
Also from Baltimore, this is from Milton, Democrats line for our guest, Gary Kasparov. Hello.
Hello, good morning. Mr. Kasparov, I want to say that, first of all, you've been a hero of mine for many, many, many years. And if I could, I have three questions I'd like to ask you. First, I would like to respond to that first caller, though, because I want to say that if it was not for the Ukrainian president, we might not even have a democracy right now. So anything that we can do to support him, I'm all in favor for. So people like her and Tucker Carlson, we can just grab them by the throat and push them aside. But my three questions are this, sir. First of all, I believe I invented two chess openings, one for white and one for black, that right out the gate is to take the initiative right to the opponent. I want to know if you have any ideas of how I can further get that looked into. And my third question is this. Being a chess player and considering my opponent's options and next moves, sir, are you taking preventive measures to make sure that you stay safe? Because God forbid we lose you and we lose a very important voice.
Milton, thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's start from your third question. So we do what we can. So, and I emigrated from Russia 9 years ago in February 2013, facing imminent arrest for my political stand against Putin's dictatorship. I live in New York with my family, and that's the best I can do. The rest is beyond my power. So I could worry about all the threats to my physical security, but would it help? So I don't travel to countries where I think it's my safety would be in jeopardy. The countries that have close relations to Russian dictator or could be influenced to extradite me. I don't drink tea with strangers, but otherwise there's nothing else I can do. As for the game of chess, so yeah, it's the statistically, if you play white, you make a first move. So it's about 53% chance of winning if you look at the Grandmaster games. But I'm also quite reluctant, just to.
Yeah, when you're playing in chess, if you're playing black, the best thing that you can hope for is a draw, which is kind of amazing.
To use chess parallels to analyze the international situation, because I always say that Putin and dictators, they don't play chess, because chess has rules and it's 100% open information game. So you know exactly what your opponent has. Dictators always play poker, and they know how to bluff. Again, because they don't care about public opinion, about compromise in the parliament, in the Congress. They're immune from the criticism of the press. So they can move on instantly, throwing bargaining chips to the table and raising the stakes. And it's very unfortunate that the free world keep folding cards for too long.
Leo, in California, Republican line, go ahead.
Good morning, sir. I want to talk about trade routes. Ukraine is surrounded by the Baltic Sea, which Russia controls, and Belarus, and they also have bases in Syria. My main concern is the Arctic Circle and the sea lanes, the South China Sea. The Arctic Circle, Russia has troops stationed there. They've got icebreakers where they're setting up camps. They're literally surrounding the north. And in the South China Sea, China controls the South China Sea. They're putting on the pressure in the Philippines to take over that area. They also have bases in Africa. They also have control in the canals. I'm wondering how long it takes before these axis of evil surrounds the United States and puts pressure on our dollar. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a great question, and that's brings us back to geopolitics. And that's why every conflict is important, because, as you pointed out correctly, it's a part of a plan of dictators, axis of evil, to end American role as a global leader. And of course, attacking dollar and American economy is one of their top priorities. And recognizing these dangers is very important. So actually, Ukraine doesn't have access to Baltic Sea, and I think the Swedes and Finns, they might be, or even Poles, they might be frightened by the statement that Russia controls Baltic Sea. So it still has pretty strong influence of Scandinavian countries and NATO nations like Poland or Latvia and Estonia. But destroying Ukraine would be a very strong statement of Putin's intentions. And you pointed out correctly that Russia has a massive military buildup in Arctica, in Arctic Circle, and it's still, it's overdue for Canadians actually to recognize the danger, because Trudeau administration is very slow to in responding. And of course, China is considering South China Sea its home sea, its home lake, and it continues its military buildup there. Again, keeping Taiwan in mind. It's all about what they call reunification of China. Though Taiwanese people who build their most successful economy and democracy in the region, okay, maybe South Korea, so there's those two countries, thanks to America. Let's not forget, thanks to America, that these two nations, Taiwanese and South Koreans, they're prosperous, they're democratic, and they, by the way, they play a crucial role in supporting high-tech industry in the world. And China looks at Taiwan as a top prize for its expansionist policies. You also pointed out at Africa, correctly so. It's not just China, as I said already. You can see Russians now, Russian paramilitary and Russian oligarchs making deals with African dictators. It's in Mali, in Burkina Faso now, there was a coup d'etat. It's in Central African Republic, in Mozambique. So across African continents, Zimbabwe, they're trying to plunder the riches of Africa and competing with China. Though again, it's you may call it a friendly competition, and it's all after all, it's about reducing America's influence and pushing America away from the global stage. And if nothing is being done, if America has no long-term strategy, let's go back to chess, strategic vision. So how we stop this expansionism of dictators, we all suffer the consequences. In 1946, Truman administration came up with a global plan to stop the spread of communism, and it took more than four decades to win this war. But what we knew that every administration, Democratic or Republican, followed this strategic concept. There could be some minor differences, but the plan was there. And I think now America, for a long time, has been missing the strategic plan, the vision. What is America's role in the 21st century? We still have a big role to play. And for those who say, oh, China will be dominant, I always say, China gave us COVID. America brought vaccine that saved the world.
From Dennis Dane, Wisconsin, Democrats line.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kasparov, for your bringing your vision and the democracy initiative to light. I am very disappointed with American military planners or American vision for the future. They seem to have their heads buried deeply in the sand. I agree that we must come to the aid of the Ukrainians and thwart the Russian aggression. I believe that we also have a Chinese threat at our northern border with the Chinese pilots that are training allegedly in unused Canadian bases, but that's another issue. I'm thinking that we must come immediately to the Ukrainian aid and shake hands with the Ukrainian people and tell them that we are their cohorts for the future. I'm thinking like 2,000 A-10 Warthogs would basically lay the entire Russian invasionary force to basically scrap metal and body parts, and that would send a very strong message to Mr. Putin and and the Chinese.
Okay, we got your point. Dennis in Wisconsin, Mr. Kasparov.
Yeah, it's again. I keep saying no boots on the ground. All America has to do is to supply Ukraine with weapons, and it has been happening as we speak. Again, it's probably less than Ukrainians wanted, but still it sends a message. It's late. I wish Ukraine had these weapons earlier, but now with anti-tank missiles and also with anti-aircraft missiles, so Ukrainians are in the position to inflict massive damage to invading Russian troops. Russia has over 100,000 people. It varies from 125 to 175,000 troops around Ukraine. But Ukraine can mobilize 300,000 to 400,000 men who have already experience in military training, and that will definitely cause tremendous damage to Putin's invading army. And with America, this administration demonstrating its readiness to support Ukraine. That's what caused Putin's hesitations. And that's why the Russian ambassador you just heard a few minutes ago in the United Nations, it was played, talks about peace and about Russia's intentions to find diplomatic solutions. There's an easy solution. Remove the troops from the border. Bring them back to their stations inside Russia. Russia is a big country. You don't have to concentrate hundreds of thousands of troops next to Ukraine in the West. While, by the way, we all know that the only threat to Russian territorial integrity comes from China. If you look at the Chinese maps, they put nearly half of my country as future China. And we have a situation that we're in Russia from West Siberia, Novosibirsk to Vladivostok, far east. We have about 20 million or less Russians. And we have more than 250 million Chinese living on the other side of the border. And Chinese keep crossing the border, building the businesses, and now great chunks of my country, they are already economically subdued to China, and they're working to support China's economy. That's what Russia has to be concerned with. And I hope that one day Russia will join the family of civilized nations, the Europeans, Americans, to fight against Chinese threat, because that's the real imperialist threat, and that's what we should be considerate of.
The website for the Renewed Democracy Initiative is rdi.org. Garry Kasparov serves as their chairman, also the author of the book, Winter is Coming, Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. Mr. Kasparov, thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.
We will go back to the question that we started off this morning as far as when it comes to the worlds of science and medicine. Have your views of those worlds changed because of the COVID vaccine? You can call and let us know if you say yes, those views have changed. 202-748-8000. No, 202-748-8001. And perhaps you're unsure. 202-748-8002 is the number to call. We'll take those calls when Washington Journal continues.
Their lives and work. Many
Washington Journal continues.
The Associated Press did a survey taking people's opinions on the worlds of science and medicine and how much faith they had in those, how much trust they had in those, and opinion of it, especially due to the COVID pandemic. And here's some of the results of that. When they were asked, 48% of those who were surveyed said they had what was called a great deal of confidence in the scientific community. That broke down to 64% of Democrats, 34% of Republicans, and then that showed also a 30-point gap, up from 9 percentage points since 2018. We'll show you more of that poll, but we're asking you in the 20 minutes or so that we have, if when it comes to the worlds of science and medicine, have your opinion changed of those worlds due to COVID? And here's how you can let us know. If you say yes, 202-748-8000, a number to call. If you say no, 202-748-8001. And then perhaps you are unsure, you can call us at 202-748-8002. And you can also text us your thoughts at 202-748-8003. Some people posting on our Facebook page, which we posted earlier, and you can still comment there. This is Jay Bosock saying that COVID has made me more grateful for science. Donald Cartmel saying that he says, when it comes to his opinion, he says, no, I know more about mRNA and the process of developing modern vaccines now, but my views did not change. COVID changed my view of my fellow man and modern brainwashing techniques, however. And then Alan Skillicorn saying that money seems to drive everything. The mandates prove that no form of government-run system is acceptable. It's time to decouple the politicians and bureaucrats from our doctors and our hospitals. That's just some of the opinion from our Facebook page. Again, you can post there a couple of pieces over the last couple of weeks taking a look at this topic. Dr. David Engenthaler leads the Infectious Disease Division of the Translational Genomics Research Institute at a recent op-ed in USA Today, in which he wrote this: the concept of science has been misused and abused since we first had heard of the novel coronavirus. Science is not owned by one political side, and it's not a talking point to cheer or scoff. Science is the careful study of the natural world, asking questions about why things are the way they are, testing hypotheses, and sharing results to add to our collective knowledge, and sometimes correcting our previous quote knowledge. Science is not just a discrete set of immutable facts. It is a continuum of learning. Science should be used as neither a punchline or a weapon. Rather, as Louis Pasteur would remind us, it should be used to understand the world and illuminate the best way for us to serve humanity. If you read that, you can do so at the page of USA Today. Another viewpoint, this is from Daniel Henniger in the Wall Street Journal, taking a look at the same idea. This was from the 22nd of last month, in which he wrote this: political leaders try to convey the impression of control over events insofar as most are always on thin ice with the public. With the pandemic, the most visible faces of U.S. authority across 2 years, Donald Trump, Andrew Cuomo, Joe Biden, became caricatures of the in-control public figure. In their world, we were always winning. At the center of this collapse of public confidence sits science, which has a lot to answer for. The problem is not the process of scientific discovery as understood for centuries. The problem is, quote, science, a politicized totem now used to routinely silence legitimate challenge, for example, regarding what happened in Wuhan. How can we be winning if a significant portion of the U.S. population has come to believe that the representations of science about climate and COVID are mostly, to pick a word, disinformation? Again, your thoughts on science and medicine, if those views have changed because of COVID. We'll start in California, in Oakland. John says those views have changed. John, good morning. Go ahead.
Hey, so my name's John. I'm amazed at how fast the vaccine was developed. I don't think it has anything to do with Trump and light speed, but better living through chemistry.
Let's hear from Josh. Josh in Illinois, who says when it comes to his views, they have not changed. Josh, good morning.
Good morning, Pedro. I just want to make a few comments as far as the doctors people keep referring to as inventing the mRNA vaccine, and the ones that keep saying they're finding out this Rob Johnson second opinion panel. Say you got 10,000 doctors, you can always find a group that are always going to say, no, 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 this is wrong, and want their voices heard over everybody else. Imagine when the AIDS pandemic started, if we had social media back then, and with how it was portrayed back then, if you could get AIDS by kissing someone, you could get AIDS by drinking after someone. All these theories about how you could get AIDS back then. imagine the social media, how they would be these days with something like that.
So your views specifically on these science and medical communities, you say they haven't changed. Is that the case?
No, I mean, you got to believe in the science, like the previous callers talked about cancer. I mean, you trust when you go into the cancer doctor, you're not going to say, no, we don't want your help, you know, knowing that they're there and they have the treatment to help you, even though you don't know what it is. You haven't heard of the treatment. You don't know what ingredients are in the drugs that are helping you with the treatment.
Okay. That's Josh there in Illinois. Let's hear from Joe, Eastlake, Ohio, on our Yes line. Hello. Josh in Ohio. Hello. Josh, are you there? Or, sorry, this is Joe. I apologize. Go ahead, Joe.
Hello?
Yeah, you're on. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. How you doing today?
You're on. Go ahead.
What I want to say is I have very little faith. I have very little faith in the CDC or the NIH anymore. My feelings are that as long as the scientists work for the government, they will do whatever the government tells them to do. This is how they get paid. This is how they get promoted. And as having spent 30 years with the government, I know that anybody that doesn't follow the line has no future in the government. It's that simple. Plus the fact that we've cut Fauci in dozens of lives. We have emails where he has bought off people that have disagreed with them. I mean, why? How can you trust any of these people?
Okay. That's Joe there in Ohio. USA Today, when it comes to testing kits, a story that you can find in their pages saying in a few short months, states have gone from donating surplus rapid coronavirus tests to states with shortages to hoarding them as demand driven by the spike in COVID-19 cases strained supplies. Last January, North Dakota had amassed 2.7 million Abbott Laboratories Bionax Now rapid tests from the federal government, roughly 3.5 tests for each person in a state of 775,000 people. The state had so many tests that it donated 1 million of them to Montana and Pennsylvania as part of a sharing program among states that formed when the Delta coronavirus variant was the dominant strain and COVID-19 outbreaks rippled across the nation. But now that Omicron has turned the entire nation into coronavirus hotspot and driven up demands for tests everywhere, that system has been upended. Some states are holding on to expired tests as a last resort. In early January, North Dakota was one of them with a stockpile of 600,000 expired rapid tests. You can read more of that at USA Today. Charleston, West Virginia, on your views of science and medicine, if they've changed due to COVID. This is Chuck on our No Line. Go ahead.
Thank you, Pedro. Good morning. And no, I've always been very scientifically minded. And actually, this past July, I retired after working for over 28 years for the West Virginia Bureau for Public Health. So public health is very important to me. And it's interesting, one of your previous callers was talking about what it would be like if social media was around during the early years of the AIDS epidemic. And I remember those early years very well. People were screaming about how people with HIV and AIDS should be quarantined, how they should have some kind of tattoo on their forehead so they could be easily identified. And, they were just talking about cracking down on people living with HIV because, of course, those were, other kinds of people, not regular folks like us, and nobody was screaming about their personal freedoms back then. And now I look at what's happening today, and like I said, I'm a very scientifically minded person, and I have seen Dr. Anthony Fauci speak. I was in Atlanta a few years ago for a national HIV conference, and I listened to Anthony Fauci speak. That man has impeccable credentials. And the people that are calling in to turn him into some kind of monster, they don't know what they're talking about. And in the age of social media, I'll tell you what, Pedro, I'm really starting to lose hope in the future of this country because we used to be on the forefront of the advancing modern world. And now we are devolving into a nation of narcissistic conspiracy theorists, people who think that evolution is a hoax, people who think that climate change is a hoax, people who actually believe the earth is flat.
Okay. That's Chuck in West Virginia. Let's hear from Tessa in Tampa, Florida on our Yes line. Hello.
Hi, yes. I do believe that this has changed my view. I don't disagree with the science itself, but to me, science could have changed what we believed 2 years ago, has changed and evolved over time. What I do believe has changed my view on science is how people use science. Science can be used, now not necessarily by the doctors and the scientists who actually are studying it, but the people who take that information and use it to their advantage. And that's how it's really kind of changed my view. What can be done and what can be pulled out to meet somebody's needs, some politicians' needs. Not denying the science is there, but again, what we thought was true last year has changed in many ways this year, and how it's being used against us or how it's being used to advance us is just where my viewpoint has changed.
That's Tessa there in Tampa, Florida. Burt Prime from Facebook, when it comes to his opinion, saying his views have changed, saying, yes, I found out that when you question science, you're literally attacking science. And then Gina Farley says, not at all, but it has changed my view of people completely. It's difficult to care for those who don't give a second thought to anyone but themselves. The Washington Post takes a look at a story about the Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra and his role during COVID, with the story saying that there are questions about it coming from inside the White House. Part of the story reads, Becerra, former California Attorney General and longtime congressman with no frontline health care experience, was never given a clear role in a response that has run out of the White House, prompting Defender to say it is unfair to blame him for recent stumbles. Still, his low profile has become more confounding as the pandemic has worn on, and health officials have made statements that sometimes blindsided the president and bewildered the public, according to some officials and outside experts. They also say the health secretary isn't fulfilling a core responsibility of the job, which is to act as a de facto field marshal coordinating the nation's fast health bureaucracy to achieve the White House's strategy, even though he does not set it. For instance, they cite officials' airing of differences over booster shots and COVID-19 isolation guidance as confusing and unnecessary. And they said that the tension between Becerra and the White House has complicated the pandemic response at a time when Americans are already exhausted and struggling to make sense of ever-changing guidelines. You can read more of that at the Washington Post. Let's hear from Pleasant Grove, Alabama on our No line. This is Robert. Hello.
Yes, hello. Thank you for taking my call, Pedro. It's a no for me because my wife works for an assisted living center, and out here in Alabama, without the mandates, they are hiring people that's not vaccinated. And recently, about 2 days ago, me and my wife was diagnosed with COVID. So, thank God we're 100% vaccinated. We got our booster shots. She's getting the grunt of it. Her body is hurting her and everything. We're both quarantined together. But she's getting the grunt of it. I'm really not feeling too many of the symptoms. And, the doctors told her if she didn't have her vaccine, she would not have made it. She's having pressure in her chest. She couldn't breathe. She was having aches all over her body, and it was just bad, And I implore people, this thing is picking and choosing who it wants to take out of here. And you can't play with your lives, America. You really can't. This thing is serious. Thank you for taking my call.
Let's hear from Barry, East Hampton, Massachusetts, on our Yes line. Hi.
Hi, yes.
That's a good way of saying things. It's picking and choosing who it wants to take out. Wow.
My views have changed on science because they say that the science changes, but then I keep hearing so many different things. Like I heard Dr. Robert Malone talking on Joe Rogan's podcast about how it hurts your immunity to get so many shots, and now I'm hearing it again, that it can hurt your immunity to get so many shots in such a short period of time. And on Infowars.com, they were talking about how you can't really listen to the science because, I mean, if you want to listen to science, then there's only two genders, and then abortion is murder. So I guess that's
as far as those sources. Why do you trust those sources fundamentally?
It's not that I trust those sources, but I mean, 17,000 people just marched on Washington. 17,000 doctors. And they won't believe them what they're saying about the shots. So I mean, there's many different opinions, and to say that something's disinformation or that the science is wrong on it when people have monetary issues like Fauci on making money on these different things, then their views are clouded and not impartial. It's just ridiculous. I want all the different views and to see what I decide and make my own decision.
Okay. Dr. Malone was part of that event that the caller had talked about, that rally that took place here in Washington, D.C., taking a look at vaccine mandates. As part of his presentation, talked about the state of vaccines and such. Here's part of that event from last week.
I'm getting frustrated because
we'll go to Les.
this bit of math that I have to do, I can't do without a fucking graphing calculator, and nothing that I'm looking for on the internet is giving me.
How are you doing?
Les in Indiana, hello.
I'm doing great myself.
You're on, go ahead.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say it has changed my mind because you've got these people out there who like Ready Roundup that had their stuff for so many years and then come to find out it caused cancer. And then Johnson & Johnson got approved by the FDA, and then they come to find out it caused cancer. What good is it? What good is the FDA and Dr. Fauci, the guy who was lifting him up? Why don't you realize something? He helped create this little virus. He helped get them money that created this little virus. So I don't know why he would want to lift him up on a pedestal, and I don't know why we trust the FDA anymore, because if somebody pays them off, they're just going to turn around and approve the drug, and then you can all sue them later if you're one of the people that got sick from it.
Okay, okay, that's Les there. Here's Dr. Malone from last week.
I come to you with an open heart as a physician committed to healing, bringing 3 simple words, each of which ring like bells in the soul of honest people. Integrity, dignity, community. Integrity is a commitment to truth in what you say, how you live, how you treat others. Dignity flows from respect for ourselves, for each other, and for the world we live in. Community is what binds us together to each other and gives our lives purpose and meaning. St. Augustine, the doctor of the Roman Catholic Church, famously said, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself." Harry Truman, a warrior against war profiteering,
I have to buy a calculator and do
more
all
of
this
now,
tomorrow. It's so frustrating.
famously said, "I just tell the truth and they think it's hell." These are my truths, and I believe they're self-evident. We should not have politicized the public health response to SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19.
We'll hear from Richard in West Virginia on our Yes line. Hello.
Good morning. Yeah, my view of public health has changed, especially because if you see an organization calls itself related to public health, you know there's 2 things they don't care about: the public or the public.
Oh,
health.
sick. Class is canceled tomorrow. Oh, that's so nice.
As a cudgel for a power grab by the government and
There's
for
pre-recorded videos for tomorrow. Okay.
Vaccination manufacturers. And I didn't come to this decision right away. When they came out with the vaccine, I thought, Well, let's wait a while. It's brand new, and let's see what.
Sounds good. Those Wednesdays are the days that
And
keep
as I
getting
watch
canceled.
what
I don't want to
happens,
cancel my
I
office
see
hours yet
the,
again. Instead of fully
creating
canceling
religion,
them, work
I
with
call
me
that.
individually to arrange a time to meet.
There's no
If you were going to come
scientific reason for having mandates other than government control and selling, and selling or not selling on us.
I gotta. Oh my god! I gotta email this guy about.
Money on this thing because according to the very own reports, the vaccine does not prevent you from getting COVID. It does not prevent you from.
I want to get back into sword fighting.
And so there should be no mandate.
Oh,
so
that's
like
gonna be frustrating. I'm not gonna be able to go into this school. I'm not gonna be able to go into the school tomorrow and get a fucking calculator then.
The whole science and medical profession. And
that's so
really
frustrating.
It is.
I bet Target will have fucking calculators. You got it.
Same thing.
It's like a fucking college Target in a college
Let's go to
town.
Don in St. Joseph's, Missouri, on our no line.
Hi, Pedro. When I grew up, we didn't have a edict come down from Washington D.C.
I'm gonna go to the bathroom.
So, we went to a family doctor, a guy who had an office on the corner upstairs. But so what made American medicine greatest in the world is the freedom of choice. Buyer beware. You don't get an edict down from Washington D.C. telling you what attorney to hire. You go to who you think is right, who you get word of mouth is good. And so these edicts coming down, mandates coming down from Washington D.C. is ridiculous, totally ridiculous.
Okay, that's Don in Missouri on our no line. We got a few more minutes of this question, but before we'll let you hear from Dr. Fauci himself. Was on MSNBC last week, was asked about this idea of trust and public confidence in science, and here's some of his perspective.
The issue of restoring trust in the public health sector. There's been we've discussed this, you and I have. There are grifters, there are people that are intentionally trying to politicize this. But obviously there is a collective disappointment in public health. How do you want to fix this going forward? What are some things that you'd recommend in improving, whether it's the CDC's reputation, public health in general? I guess lessons learned in the communication part of things.
Well, I think you just said it. First of all, we have to stick with the science, and one of the treacheries of this, if you want to call it that, is that this is a moving target, and the public understandably expects a very consistent message that doesn't change. And in fact, when the virus, which has changed, let's just look at the facts, Chuck. We've had the original Wuhan strain, then we had Alpha, Beta, Delta, Omicron, each with a different bit of a characteristic to it. So things have changed. And with the change in the virus has come change in some of the scientific issues that have resulted in change in some recommendations. That's the reality. Could we have done better in communicating that? No doubt, Chuck. I think we all need to admit that and realize that. But the underlying reason for the change and some of the underlying reason for some of the communication issues is the fact that people need to recognize we're not dealing with a static target. We're dealing with a moving target. And I know that's so difficult for people to appreciate, but that's just what the reality is.
Let's hear from Patty in New York on our Yes line. Hello.
Hello. Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN, and thank you for taking my call. It's interesting for me the way that science and medicine has changed. In my view, isn't necessarily science and medicine has changed. It's just astonishing how I never would have expected people, especially so many people, to question folks that we've looked to for years, for advice, the folks who do this for a living and study it, and the impact that it's had on people that are close to me. I was really quite upset, excuse me, to see Dr. Malone comments aired on your program this morning, Pedro. It's dangerous, the kind of rhetoric that they're putting out there, and to platform these people lends them a certain level of credibility that I really don't think is helpful.
Well, that's Patty in New York. A couple of stories otherwise of topics of science and medicine. This one dealing with former President Trump. The New York Times on its front page, Trump sought ways to seize voting machines. The story reading that 6 weeks after Election Day, with his hold on power slipping, the President Trump directed his lawyer Rudy Giuliani to make a remarkable call. Mr. Trump wanted him to ask the Department of Homeland Security if they could legally take control of voting machines in key swing states, 3 people familiar with the matter said. Mr. Giuliani did so, calling the department's deputy secretary, who said he lacked the authority or audit to impound the machines. Mr. Trump pressed Mr. Giuliani to make that inquiry after rejecting a separate effort by his outside advisors to have Pentagon take control of those machines. You can read more of that in the New York Times this morning. Also in the New York Times, Mark Short, a former aide to former Vice President Mike Pence, testifying in front of the January 6th panel in closed session, saying he appeared in response to a subpoena from the committee, according to 3 people with knowledge of the developments, making him the most senior person around Mr. Pence who is known to have cooperated in the inquiry. Lower on in the story saying that Mr. Short was with Mr. Pence on January 6th as a mob of Mr. Trump's supporters attacked the Capitol, and his firsthand knowledge of the effort by Mr. Trump and his allies to try to persuade the former vice president to throw out the legitimate electoral votes for Joseph Biden in favor of fake slates of pro-Trump electors. And then if you go to the Washington Post this morning, another one as far as archive and records going to the January 6th committee, saying that the National Archives on Monday...
Boy, I'm excited for my day off tomorrow.
Saying that former...
It's not a day off. It's literally just going to be me catching up on homework.
Records turned over from the Trump White House, quote, included paper records that had been torn up by the former president, Donald Trump. The statement came in response to a question from the Washington Post about whether some January 6th related records had been ripped up or taped back together. Some of the documents turned over by the White House had not been reconstructed at all, according to the archives. One more call from this, and this is John, Tampa, Florida, on our Unsure line. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm unsure more or less about everything with regard to science and the politics of it, because America's got to remember when this virus hit the world. When we didn't even have a case here in America, we were all in America watching it ravage places like Italy and Spain, and prior to that, it was in China. We didn't even have a case here in America, and the president at the time, President Trump, was saying that this was a Democratic hoax. So it was politicized from the beginning by Donald Trump. He thought that he was so important that the Democrats had the power to release a virus in China to destroy him. I mean, he's not that important. This thing is affecting the whole world.
Okay.
So the problem for me is I just realized that the science part I understand, but what makes me unsure is how easy it can be politicized.
Okay.
That's the part that makes me unsure.
That's John, Tampa, Florida, finishing off this round. To those of you, thank you for participating. Our last segment of the day takes a look at regulations put in place by the Biden administration. Not only the number of regulations, but the financial impact of those regulations. Joining us for that discussion, Dan Bosch of the American Action Forum. He serves as their regulatory policy director. We'll have that conversation when Washington Journal continues.
More C-SPAN. I like this stuff. I want more viewer calls. Is there more viewer calls through the day? There's 2. I know there's 2. There's the 7 a.m., there's the 9 a.m., and then... That's it, huh? Just get the 7 a.m. and the 9 a.m.? Okay. Let's hear this. This might be interesting.
See you, sir.
Oh, this is long. Here. How long is this? 3 hours? Can't say what I want more. Here. We'll do this one.
See you, sir. Mr. Chairman, how are you going to operate confirmation hearings with COVID going on? You think everybody's going to have in-person meetings, or they're going to do things physically together?
Don't know the answer to that. We're going to be very careful to protect the safety.
Has a role.
Let's get to the meeting. Darkness. There we go.
Needs school.
The cost of insulin to choosing a qualified.
All right, that seems like it'll get to it eventually.
No, we're just kind of.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm joined today by Senators Murray, Stabenow, and Blumenthal.
Good old Schumer.
So we're talking about judges. In the first year of the Biden administration, as you know, we've had tremendous success confirming federal judges. Tremendous success. We have confirmed more judges to the federal bench, 43 as of this morning, than any president in his first year since Reagan. And that's a big accomplishment. These are, of course, lifetime appointments. In fact, the judges who have been nominated and confirmed not only have remarkable demographic diversity, women, people of color, but for the first time, real professional diversity as well. Public defenders, public interest lawyers, community folks, as opposed to simply partners in big fancy law firms and prosecutors. With Justice Breyer's decision to retire at the end of this term, President Biden has an opportunity to make the Supreme Court look more like America by nominating the first black woman in U.S. history to serve as a justice. We have had 115 justices in the history of this country. Only 5 have been women, only 2 have been African American, none have been African American women. So this is simply having the court reflect America, which it hasn't in the past. Until, I believe it is 40 or 50 years ago, there were only white males on the bench on the Supreme Court. So America changes and evolves and moves, and so should the Supreme Court. So what President Biden said is a good idea.
Hell yeah.
Now, the Senate will have a fair process that moves quickly to confirm the president's pick. I applaud President Biden's commitment to choosing a qualified and a historic nominee. A more balanced, more diverse judiciary has been our top goals ever since we got into the majority a year ago. And we are achieving that, and now we will achieve that, hopefully, at the Supreme Court level as well. The more Americans look at our courts and see people who look like them and come from the same backgrounds and share similar experiences,
there we go,
the better off our justice system and our democracy will be. This week, Senate Democrats are working to confirm even more of President Biden's highly qualified nominees. And in the theme of continuing our success from 2021 into 2022, Democrats are focused on passing legislation that directly helps American families. Today, our economy is in the midst of a historic turnaround with record wage and economic growth. And people talk about, 5.7%. To me, one of the most important things in the economy is wage growth is real. For decades, economists and average folks decried the fact.
Dang, the video for this is a little, here, maybe it's still kind of loaded. Give it some chance to buffer. You gonna do that for us, bud? Are you gonna buffer? Remember buffering? Remember buffering? I don't even think things buffer anymore.
Some of the statistics I've seen show that for about 75% of all Americans, there was no real growth between 2000 and 2020. But now wages are going up. And the second prong of that, getting wages up, is getting costs down. And we Democrats are focusing on getting costs down. In 2021, we responded to the COVID crisis by passing the American Rescue Plan 2 months into the president's term. Of course, we passed a historic infrastructure package that's putting people to work, fixing our roads, our bridges, our highways. And now we're focused on doing more to help families get ahead and stay ahead. Focus to help those not into the middle class to get there, giving them the ladders up they need. Those in the middle class to keep them there and to alleviate their anxiety that they won't stay there. And that's what we're doing. Now, the House is now joining the Senate to pass legislation that will help businesses struggling with strained supply chains. The chip shortage has raised the prices of cars, of appliances, of iPhones, and our bill, USICA, will do that. It also does something else very important to the American people. It says we want the jobs in America, not overseas, in China or Germany or anywhere else. We want them in America. In America. USICA will help make investments on Main Street. You've already seen what happened in Ohio, and it brings good-paying jobs back to the United States. So the continuing push by Democrats and by the Biden administration to have wages go up instead of stay flat is there. We're continuing also to pursue legislation that will lower the cost of prescription drugs and cap the cost of insulin. Instead of $600 a dose, it could go back to $36 a dose. Our agenda, and this is an important point, stands in sharp contrast on almost every item with Republicans, who seem to favor the powerful, wealthy special interests and stand in the way, prescription drugs being a classic example, but there are many of those. So, while we got a lot done in 2021, we're not resting on our laurels. We're going to keep working on these important issues. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you. Everyone understands the real frustration families are feeling right now and knows we've got to keep our foot on the gas. We have a lot of work ahead, but the progress we have made so far over the past year really offers us a clear path forward. Democrats took action on the American Rescue Plan to fight this pandemic. And today, thanks to President Biden's leadership and our work, over 200 million people are now fully vaccinated. Free tests are available at covidtest.gov, and free masks are now available at pharmacies and grocery stores across the country. Last year, following historic investments in our nation's infrastructure and in our families and communities, our economy grew faster than it has in nearly 4 decades, and unemployment dropped back below 4%. Thanks to support for schools to get tests and masks and improve ventilation and meet our students' needs, schools are now in a much stronger position today to safely stay open for in-person learning. And following the efforts we took to lower costs, a record 14.5 million people got health care through the federal exchange last year, and they saved on average over $2,000 a year. We've also saved pensions that workers and retirees rely on from devastating cuts. Now, none of this was a given. It's not the result of chance. It was the result of action and leadership. That is important to remember because what happens next is not a given either. Whether we build on the progress for families or lose it, it's a question of will. Democrats want to press forward with additional action in Build Back Better to bring down our health care costs, especially drug costs, bring down child care costs, and address the climate crisis and more. We also want to make our nation competitive and make prices less reliant on foreign manufacturing, which is why we are working to pass legislation to strengthen our supply chains, ensure the technologies of the present and the future are made and developed right here in the U.S., and create more good-paying jobs, more investment, and greater economic prosperity for our families. This is especially important in my home state of Washington, which is already the home of premier research institutions, technology and aerospace leaders, and growers and producers that are constantly competing on the world stage. Democrats also want to improve our response to this pandemic and future health crises, to protect the right to vote, the cornerstone of our democracy. And of course, we are all excited to work with President Biden and take an historic step in ensuring that our nation's highest court truly reflects the diversity of its people by confirming the first Black woman to the Supreme Court. The past year has shown what a difference the choices we can make have for our nation. I know this has been a really impossible time for so many Americans, and we have a lot more work to do to build on the steps we've taken so far so we can end this pandemic, rebuild stronger and fairer, and give people back the certainty and stability in their lives they want. In the year ahead, Democrats are going to continue to focus on solutions, and we will work around the clock to deliver.
Senator Stabenow.
Well, thank you very much. First, let me say, because today is the first day of Black History Month, what an exciting time this is, and to know that in this month, President Biden will be nominating the first Black woman to the United States Supreme Court, and that we in the Senate are going to have the opportunity to confirm her. So it's a very exciting time. And it's also an exciting time for the economy, because President Biden and Democrats are getting the economy back on track. Every kind of number shows that. And a strong economy means strong families and strong communities, and frankly, a strong future for all Americans. Democrats worked with President Biden to pass the American Rescue Plan, no small feat. Getting shots into arms, getting kids back into classrooms, and getting our economy moving again. And it is working. When President Biden took office, 18 million people were unemployed. 18 million people. Today it's 2 million people on unemployment. We've helped businesses create 6 million jobs, the greatest year of job growth in American history. We've seen the best economic growth since 1984, and we've seen the biggest single-year drop in our unemployment rate in our nation's history. And yet we fully understand, completely that COVID-related challenges have caused prices to rise, and it's not acceptable. So Democrats are laser focused on bringing down costs for Americans. That is our focus at this moment. Since day one, President Biden and Democrats have been putting the American people first every day. Senate Republicans talk a lot about inflation. They talk about it all the time. They view it as a great political issue, but what have they done about it? What have they done other than talk about it? Well, frankly, they've done nothing but vote no on things to bring prices down. We have a report from the DPCC today on every piece that relates to the cost in American lives and how, in fact, Republicans have voted no all of them voted no over and over again. No to actions that will lower the cost of food. No on supporting restaurants that have worked hard to help people stay employed during the pandemic. No on lowering healthcare costs. No on lowering childcare costs, housing costs for people. No on lowering heating costs for people. They even voted no on the largest tax cut in a generation for American families with children. Republicans are way too busy standing up for big corporations who are actually price gouging Americans while making record profits. So we, Democrats, are laser focused on lowering costs and continuing the strongest economy in 38 years. Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you.
Member of the Judiciary Committee.
Thank you. Also a member of the Commerce Committee and chair of
Would you like
this.
to name your other committees too?
And chair of the Consumer Protection Subcommittee, where we are going to have a hearing in, well, I'm already late, on price gouging of COVID tests and other pandemic-related products. Price gouging on COVID tests. And I want to second and support my colleagues in what they've said about the priority we've given to lowering costs, particularly healthcare costs and prescription drug costs, and the need to pass measures to keep manufacturing in America and to make sure that we look at some of the areas of our economy that have not seen the kind of progress that others have. For example, restaurants. I was in a restaurant yesterday in Connecticut, in Hartford, Carbone's. Anybody who's been to Hartford knows about Carbone's. It's closed because it can't get restaurant revitalization funding, and replenishing that fund is absolutely critical. I'm grateful to my colleague, Senator Cardin, but also to Senator Wicker. It's a bipartisan measure. We need to do it, and Democrats have led on this issue, just to take one part of our program. I want to talk about President Biden's appointments to the courts. No president in American history, none, has made appointments as diverse as President Biden. This morning in the Judiciary Committee, we had testimony from 3 women nominees to the federal bench. One, a woman of Japanese descent whose parents were interned during World War II. Another, a Native American woman who grew up on a Navajo reservation. These kinds of appointees have broken new ground. Never before has any president made the federal bench look like the people of America. This diversity and inclusiveness strengthens the federal bench. And that's what President Biden will do with his nominee to the United States Supreme Court. Now, I've argued 4 cases in the United States Supreme Court, mostly before white male judges. I was a law clerk to Justice Blackmun at a time when the court was all white male judges. The strength of the courts is increased when litigants and the American people go before judges who look like America, and that's what President Biden is going to be doing. The Judiciary Committee has begun preparing. We're comparing notes. The White House has begun reaching out very significantly, and we are prepared to move quickly but fairly. And I am looking forward to a nominee who has such a compelling life story and qualifications that, in fact, there will be bipartisan support. I'm looking forward to a quick process that will be fair but expeditious. And I believe that we can do it, and we will.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, members of Judiciary and Commerce Committee. Okay, yes, we'll start the left and work your way over.
Leader Schumer, thank you. Senator Manchin earlier today said that Build Back Better is, in his words, dead. Is he right about that?
Look, there are ongoing, we're fighting hard for Build Back Better. There are lots of provisions in that bill that are very important, many of which Senator Manchin supports, such as, say, drug pricing. And so we are continuing to work on it, and there are conversations going on between Senator Manchin and different senators right now.
You know, it's like, I really feel like Manchin and even Sinema would be a lot more agreeable to most of the content in those bills if they were smaller bills. Like, the issue is we pack a lot of these things all into like one bill, and like what he's worried about is like he's seen, you know, things like, oh, we're gonna throw money at this, and then the money isn't used well, and then the program has to shut down because it's costing money after like 5 to 10 years, and like, you know, the risk of that increases the more bills you try to pack into one legislation, because unless you're actually substantizing every single bill, or every single aspect of that bill, all the contents of it, you aren't giving everything the due justice it needs to kind of get its feet off the ground, you know? But the problem that the Democrats have is they're only really like, they're trying to do as much as they can in this one term because they are very unsure about how the next election is going to turn out, and rightfully so.
Ukraine-Russia issue, are you concerned that the United States maybe should be more engaged in the military side of this? Not obviously putting troops on the ground or something like that. Compare the sanctions, and are you worried about divides in your cause?
And another thing is, so many people have such a terrible opinion about Biden. It's like, if they're going to see things get fixed, they need to see the changes happen now, you know? And the only way to do that, like, they need to, all right, if they want results in a way that like makes the people want to vote for them, they need to do everything they can within the first year. And the first year's done now. So, I mean, they still need to do everything they can, but they need to push it as quick as possible because you need to start seeing results. Like, by the end of 2024, by 2023, 2024, we should start seeing a lot of fucking orange cones, like, all over the roads, and it's just everywhere. We should be seeing a lot of construction going on because we should be seeing the results of, like, the infrastructure bill they passed. And honestly, I bet after that, and then maybe seeing gas prices go down, people might have a little bit better opinion about Biden.
Well, Senators Menendez and Reich are working very closely together and are coming close to a final agreement on a sanctions provision. There are a couple of outstanding issues that they're working on, but I am hopeful that we can get a strong bipartisan sanctions bill to the floor relatively soon.
Especially in light of the former president's comments over the weekend suggesting that he thought Mike Pence could overturn the election. Are you in favor of updating the Electoral Count Act? Do you support either of the plans that seem to be bubbling up among your members?
I have encouraged our Democratic side to discuss and set up these bipartisan meetings with the Republican side. We'll have to see what they come out with. There's another bill that was introduced today, I believe. That was Senator King's bill on ECA. Look, reforming the Electoral College is a good thing to do, but it sure doesn't replace the need to deal with voting rights, dark money, and reapportionment. Next.
Will you be moving ahead with standalone votes on Build Back Better?
Yo, they did me dirty. I wonder now. All right, so like right now I'm doing my coding homework, right? We're learning about, pull it up, concatenating. So what that means is you're taking like two strings and you're putting it all together to make one string. So like this, for instance, street number plus the string plus street is gonna be 500 Floral Avenue, even though we've created one string for 500 and one string for Floral Avenue. These pluses concatenate them. So my professor did me dirty and added a concatenating part of my program, or part of my code, in a lab I did yesterday before we even learned how to concatenate. This is a clever, like, I got to assume this is intentional, and if it is, then like this is really clever. If it's not intentional, then like screw this guy. But like it means he's literally making it so that I have to ask for help. Like, I have to ask the TA in the lab for help if I want to actually get the thing right. Oh my goodness.
Well, as I said, we're continuing to have discussions, and we will be moving forward.
Because I'm the kind of person who will try to figure it out as long as I can. Like, I don't like asking for help. And then even when I'm asking for help, it's a little awkward.
On Build Back Better. You will
Build
see
Back
how
Better.
to do that as we move forward. Yes, ma'am, and then you, Jonathan. What? Yeah, look, as I said, Build Back Better, we want to get as much of Build Back Better done as we can, and you will see us move forward on it.
Do you have any comment on the report that former President Trump was actually personally involved in ordering the seizure of voting machines? And what impact does that have in your view that any ECA bill needs to be broadened to at least address election administration?
On your second question, as I said, I thought ECA it has to do other things, and I mentioned three that were in the two bills that we had, the John Lewis bill and the Freedom to Vote Act. But dealing with interference with election officials, dealing with the issue you've brought up are important as well. And so I think that, just doing ECA is not sufficient. It may be necessary, but not sufficient. And ECA deals with the situation in 2024. A lot of these things deal with, like the situation you met, deal with 2022 and are more urgent and immediate. Yes?
Leadership, when you mentioned the House action on the Competes Act this week, that bill is very different than the USICA bill that the Senate approved. Are you worried that sorting out the differences between that partisan bill and your bill?
Well, as you know, I pushed the House to move for a long period of time. I care very much about this bill. Actually, the framework that they set up and the framework that's in the USICA bill are not that far apart. I believe all the gaps are very bridgeable. We're having productive discussions with the House Democrats. I don't know if any Republicans will support it in the House, but we're also having productive discussions with Senate Republicans, and we will get, I am very optimistic we will get this bill done very shortly.
Coding homework's really intuitive too, because if I get like what's the error? If I'm like, just get like a thing where like I just got the white space wrong, and it'll just like let me redo the problem and just fix the little like make the adjustments. But if I'm getting like the whole value wrong or something like the whole thing wrong, it'll go to another one.
Okay, last one from the background over there. That's you. That's you. Being a Democrat, I like to call on people who are in the back of the room, not just in the front row. Go ahead.
What the fuck? This is weird.
You got to say it again. I'm sorry.
This is weird. Why did he say that?
We have great bipartisan support. I believe there are 10 Republican co-sponsors. It's a bill that we would like to move very quickly. Okay? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Okay, Richard. Well done. Are you on the post office?
Who else is talking? What else do we got? This is a 12-hour ordeal. I was hoping we'd get some, like, people yelling back and forth. And, like, jeez, okay. They really just record everything, huh?
Washington Journal continues.
Joining us now, Dan Bosch of the American Action Forum. He's their regulatory policy director, here to talk about regulations of the new administration. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Remind people about the American Action Forum, particularly the point of view you take, and particularly how you view this idea of regulation.
Sure. Well, the American Action Forum is a 501c3 think tank dedicated to free market principles. And so typically when we view regulation, we like to look at it through the lens of what costs are they imposing on the economy, and then how can agencies do a better job of making sure that those regulations are efficient if they do in fact actually need to impose those costs.
A full report that your organization just put out on this topic of regulation, it's probably something that not everybody dives into every day, but why do you think it's important for people to understand this concept from an administration?
Well, it's certainly important because it gives a sense of what kind of economic impacts are being handed down by the administration. And so the report that you referenced, we looked at the first year of the Biden administration and found that they had imposed $201 billion worth of economic costs. And we have data going back to 2005. So we're able to look at that range of time and found that the Biden administration is by far the biggest first year of an administration in that time frame. And so I think when you consider the fact that typically what happens during the first year of an administration is that they're just laying the groundwork for more substantive rules to come in the future, I think it's kind of a clear indication of where we're headed, that there are going to be more economic costs coming.
You mentioned the $201 billion figure found in your report. You also mentioned the idea of 77 executive orders being signed, and then the topics, or at least the areas of vehicle emissions and COVID-19 safety measures. Can you elaborate on both those things?
Sure. Well, the vehicle emissions rule is by far the biggest rule. That's about 90% of the net total that we found. That was $180 billion. And so that rule adjusted miles per gallon standards for vehicles from model years 2023 through 2026. And then with the COVID rules, I mean, the biggest one I think a lot of people are familiar with is the mandate from OSHA on employers with 100 or more employees to either vaccinate their employees or provide testing for them. That was about $4 billion. That was also a pretty sizable one. And that one was recently struck down by the Supreme Court.
And as far as then the paperwork involved, talk a little bit about that, because I think people, you talk about financial impacts, but what does paperwork have to do with it overall?
Yeah, well, with paperwork, it's pretty simple. Time is money. And so when you look at the amount of paperwork hours that were issued last year, it was 131 million hours of annual paperwork that was added to the federal burden. And so if you figure out an hourly cost for each person that's doing that work, there's significant economic costs involved with that.
Before we go too far as a regulation is concerned, this is the technical definition from the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. I'll ask you to expand on it. It says a regulation is a general statement issued by an agency, board, or commission that has the force and effect of law. Congress often grants agencies the authority to issue regulations. Sometimes Congress requires agencies to issue a regulation. Sometimes Congress grants agencies the discretion to do so. Many laws passed by Congress give federal agencies some flexibility in deciding how to best implement those laws. Federal regulations specify the details and requirements necessary to enforce legislation enacted by Congress. If this gets done as far as regulation making, aside from works of Congress or works from the White House, ultimately, what does that mean as far as folks like you who track these things, not only for its economic impact, but overall impact on Americans?
Well, I think what it means is ultimately, you have to look at where these rules come from. As you mentioned, Congress does specify that agencies have to do certain things, but there's also instances where Congress has delegated authority decades ago to agencies. And what we're seeing now, actually, is that with Congress doing less in terms of actual legislating, agencies are being forced to try to address issues that are topical today. And they're trying to shoehorn in these regulations into authorities that are decades old, that weren't actually designed to allow these regulations to be well implemented. So I think the impact that folks feel is that you end up with less efficient regulation as a result of it. And so one unique thing about regulation is that it does take time for these things to actually be felt in the future. So it's not like, an agency issues a rule today and your viewers will feel the impact tomorrow. It's typically years down the road, and it's often reflected in things like higher prices of goods and services.
Give us an example, even if you have to go back to, say, the previous administration on that front.
Oh, sure. I think, the best example is actually the vehicles per mile, or the miles per gallon rule I mentioned on cars and trucks that the Biden administration put out. That affects model years 2023 to 2026.
Cat loves playing with
So
trash.
obviously,
I don't know
those
why.
vehicles aren't out yet. But if, your viewers were to go purchase a vehicle over that time frame, then they might find the costs are a little bit higher than they're expecting to pay.
Again, Dan, our guest is with us from the American Action Forum talking about the topic of regulation. If you want to ask him questions about the findings in the report, how regulations impact you or the impact the workings of Washington, you can call us 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8002 for Independents. If you want to text us questions or thoughts, you can do so at 202-748-8003. How would you describe at least the philosophical approach of regulations by the Biden administration?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think their philosophy is that there are a number of problems that need to be addressed. So things from the COVID pandemic to climate change, to certain labor issues. And they believe that the government can best do that job by issuing regulations to accomplish that because Congress isn't necessarily acting. And so their approach is, let's use the existing authorities that we have under law to try to issue solutions to these problems, and then to take those solutions and provide, I guess the best way to put it is to use the government to provide the best solution possible that they're able to do. But often what happens is that, I sort of mentioned this earlier, the efficiency of regulation is not there compared to some other different policy approaches that could be used. And so what you end up with is sort of inefficient, costly regulation that really doesn't actually address the problem at the end of the day.
As far as then the process itself, just for our folks understanding at home, what's the process of putting a regulation into effect?
Yeah, well, it's actually a very timely process. And I think that's also part of why regulation is so inefficient and ineffective sometimes. So what happens is the agency has to propose a rule, and so they'll publish that and allow the public to actually comment on it. And then they have to take those comments and reconsider the rule that they issued in light of those comments, and they have to address those comments in a final rule. So that process can take years because there's also, even before a rule is proposed, there's a lot of economic and effect analysis that has to be done in order to figure out, are we even coming close to regulating this in the right way? So it's a very time-consuming process. And then, one thing to keep in mind, and it's something we just saw with the Supreme Court recently striking down the OSHA vaccine mandate, is that then these things can get challenged in court. So even if a rule is issued, it's often several years before they actually go into effect and actually clear the courts and are felt by folks.
This story just actually took place yesterday. It's about the Biden administration from the New York Times. It says it's going to reinstate mercury pollution rules that were weakened under Trump. Is this a good example of as far as how administration proposes it, particularly when it deals with regulation or a rollback of regulation from a previous administration?
Yeah, I think actually it's a good illustration of how sort of another unique feature of regulatory policy is how sort of transient it can be. So we saw the Trump administration roll back an Obama administration rule, and now just yesterday, the Biden administration is proposing to roll back the Trump rule. And so that's really, a problem from a certainty standpoint for businesses and for everybody, really. I mean, I think everyone should be concerned about that. And so it's just sort of illustrative that because these things aren't being done through Congress, they're sort of held to the whims of whoever happens to be in the White House at the time.
The report that that's available online for folks there are several charts to take a look at it. There's a chart on cumulative total cost. It's by month. We're showing folks the chart, but it shows that spike in month 11 of Mr. Biden's first year. Can you describe that and the impact?
Sure. Yeah, that's the motor vehicle rule that I mentioned. And as I said, that rule was $180 billion. So out of $201 billion, that's clearly 90% of it right there. And what's sort of unique is that we didn't expect that rule to come out in the first year because, as I mentioned earlier, usually the first year is when administrations kind of lay the groundwork to issue the more substantive rules. later on. So it was sort of a surprise to see that come out when it did. But it certainly, will probably be among the most expensive regulations we see throughout this entire time in the Biden administration. And it's by far the most expensive individual rule that we tracked at AAF going back to 2005.
A basic flatline in the first year of the Trump administration, a little bit of spike in the Obama administration. This also illustrates.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, it's pretty consistent with what we expect. I mean, the first year is kind of a building up, sort of ramping up kind of phase. It was just unique with the Biden administration that they put out this rule. And actually, they published it on the last day of 2021. So within the last, few weeks of its first year in office, they put this rule out.
Here is Evan in Maryland, in Westminster, Maryland, Independent Line. You're on with our guest, Dan Bosch of the American Action Forum. Go ahead.
Hey, Dan, I just wanted to make a quick comment that I'm kind of disappointed in this administration for seeming to push the effort of emissions control onto citizens. We don't seem to have any sort of strict emissions when it comes to shipping low-end consumer goods from China on ships that burn bunker oil. Do you feel that is a similar discrepancy, or does that seem appropriate?
Well, I think the issue with regulating climate emissions in particular, so things like carbon and other greenhouse gases, is that they have to be done on sort of a one-off basis. So they have to be done like by industry, by source. It's very, and as I mentioned, the time-consuming regulatory process earlier, it just takes forever to regulate all the things you need to regulate. And then it's also not an efficient way to do it. So actually something that would be better is something that prices carbon into the market. So something like a carbon tax or some other sort of pricing mechanism would be better and more evenly distribute the costs. And, I realize you mentioned sort of things related to what China might be doing. It's difficult for the U.S. federal government to regulate anything that has to do with, what another country might be doing.
From Christian in Eugene, Oregon, Democrats Line. Good morning, you're next.
Good morning. Dan Bosch, correct?
Yes.
We've got a couple questions for you. I'm looking at the tag at the bottom, American Action Forum.
Mm-hmm.
And out of curiosity, I'm not really sure about American Action Forum. So I'm assuming they pay for your salary. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm an employee there.
That's right. And in regards to like regulation, hello, right? There's a reason why the EPA has a right standard for drinking water, pollution that pumped out in the sky, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's regulated, right?
Sure.
So yeah, we do away with regulation. Wouldn't that be like a problem? There's a reason why they have regulations, right?
Absolutely, and I'm not advocating for getting rid of regulation, and certainly, things like the safety of drinking water needs to be regulated. The only point I'm trying to raise through this research and through other research that we do here is that it's a trade-off. I mean, we need to consider the economic impacts with the risks to health and public safety. I mean, so it's all about just finding the right balance to how to regulate these things. It's not that all regulations are bad and that, things like that. It's just that we need to find the right balance.
And how is that balance achieved, and what does that balance look like?
Well, so typically the way that agencies try to find that balance is through doing a cost-benefit analysis where they'll consider what the costs will be on society and they'll consider what the benefits will be. And so, that is a fair approach to doing it. But one sort of interesting aspect of it is that since agencies are doing that analysis, they're sort of incentivized to maybe underreport the cost or just provide costs sort of as they are. And then they're sort of incentivized to not necessarily inflate benefits, but find as many benefits as possible, even if they're not, directly related from a regulation. So it's kind of a tricky balance. Agencies have to do the best they can with the resources they have. But, it's all about finding that right benefit of costs and benefits.
From Melissa in Bloomfield, Iowa, Independent Line.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I guess I have a really funny regulation question to Dan Bosch here. Is explain to us why the Biden administration put in a regulation that you can be an illegal alien, kill people, supposed to be deported for that, and they give them leniency to be able to stay here. That is totally, totally wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the question. I'm not sure I'm familiar with a specific regulation that they've put forward that allows that to happen. But certainly the agencies have to do what they think is best for the country, and they're trying to find the right balance of what's an appropriate level of immigration, and why immigration is important for our economy. They need to work on those kind of issues.
A viewer off of Twitter, Mr. Bosch, says there were so many regulations stripped away by the previous administration that nothing is safe from our wallets to our drinking water to our politicians, adding that President Biden is trying to bring some security in our lives by controlling the predators the right protects. Let's start with the first part as far as the previous administration. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, they certainly put an emphasis on deregulation. I don't think it's accurate to say that now nothing is safe. I mean, certainly, I don't think that's the case. And actually, if you look at their final numbers, they actually imposed $40 billion in costs throughout their 4 years. So it wasn't like they were just cutting away everything. They were still regulating as well.
And then to the second point, as far as Mr. Biden, as far as the idea of security and protection, as far as these new regulations that you talk about, what about that prospect?
Well, I guess, so I would just caution folks to think that often people say we need a regulation for this, and that we have a regulation, and so this is going to be the ideal solution. Oftentimes, a regulation is not the ideal solution. It could be a part of a solution, but typically, people tend to think that a regulation is sort of a utopian decision, and it's a compromise, or it should be a compromise like any other policy, and it's about finding that right balance.
If then not regulation, what other ways could you achieve the same result?
Oh, well, certainly Congress could step in, and one of the things that Congress can do to help these agencies is actually give them the authorities they need to regulate things in a better way. So a good example is with climate regulation. The EPA uses the Clean Air Act to regulate climate emissions. It wasn't designed for those kinds of things. So you end up with, as I mentioned earlier, these sort of one-off industry regulations, whereas maybe a broader authority that limits EPA to the emissions they're allowed to regulate, and put some guardrails around how they identify costs and benefits related to that would be a better solution.
This is Joel in Massachusetts, Democrats Line. You're on with our guest. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Dan. I love the fact that you folks have these think tank folks come on. And one thing I do when I see a name come up, I pull up on the internet and I look at their funding. And our friends there at the American Action Forum get their money from insurance companies, the American Petroleum Institute, pharmaceutical companies, quality nursing, home care, Americans for Job Security. So, Dan, how much of a balance can you offer on regulations when you, in fact, are paid for by big business? Thanks for letting me share that.
No, I appreciate that. And that's
awesome.
A good question. And I would just say that, we are a 501c3 organization. People are allowed to donate to us if they feel that we reflect the principles that they support, and that they think that we do valuable work. For me personally, what funding comes in has no effect on the work I do or the research I do. So, I get that you can look at an organization.
Oh, he's so ready for that answer.
Conclusions, but I would just caution, jumping the gun and thinking that someone is
fucking
totally
ready for that shit.
Where they get their funding from.
You talked about this earlier, Mr. Bosch, about the paperwork hours involved, a chart then again reflected in the report that you put out with spikes in months 6 and 10 there. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, those were a couple of the OSHA mandates that I mentioned earlier related to the COVID vaccine. So the first one was a rule geared entirely at healthcare workers that went into effect that was issued in the summer. Then the second one is the OSHA mandate on employers and service and centers that use Medicare funding. They had to require their employees to be vaccinated, and that was all in November. And so there were a lot of paperwork costs involved in, making sure the records on employees are up to date and that kind of thing.
Dan Bosch of the American Action Forum, again, our guest. He's their regulatory policy director from Milton in Delaware, Independent Line.
Yes, my comment is about Biden giving out the solar panel help to have them manufactured in India. I think it is totally asinine, and it should not be, and it should be stopped.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that view. I'm not familiar with that.
Oh,
It's
man.
a trade kind of tariff issue, which is a little bit outside my wheelhouse, but
That's what I'm supposed to do.
that,
Okay.
You're certainly entitled to your opinion on that.
From early on, the administration, and you elaborate on this if you would, as far as how they approached it, they released something called a modernization memo, taking a look at how they approach it. Talk about the memo. Talk about how it impacts what they do as far as regulation.
Sure. Well, this is exciting for me because this really gets into the weeds of rulemaking. So what this is it prescribes how the White House will review regulations. So I don't know if a lot of folks know, but for executive agencies anyway, which are the typical cabinet agencies that we all know, their rules are sent to the White House to be reviewed before they're published. And so there's an office at the White House called the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs. They review those rules to make sure that the analyses have been done correctly and that what the agency is proposing or finalizing actually meets the objectives that the administration wants to achieve. And so what this memo did was it has discussed shifting how OIRA reviews those costs and benefits and how agencies are supposed to assess those. And so it's supposed to account for more things like distributional impacts on disadvantaged communities and things like climate change. And so at the end of the day, what effect that will have practically is that it will allow agencies to claim even more benefits for their regulations as opposed to the cost. And so I think the goal of the Biden administration in doing this is that their rules will look more beneficial than maybe they actually are. And that will help them sort of succeed in courts when they're challenged ultimately.
I was going to say, to what extent then can regulation can face a legal challenge, and what's the success rate of regulation staying in place?
Yeah, I don't have specifics on what the success rate is. I do know that especially a lot of the major rules, the ones that are costly, the ones that we're talking about today, those often end up getting challenged because there's some entity or interest that thinks that the agency has overstepped their bounds or hasn't adequately considered the cost of the rule vis-a-vis the benefits. So we often see these challenged in court, and we're seeing with this current Supreme Court that we have, they seem to have a lot more interest in these kind of rules. I mentioned that just a couple of weeks ago, they blocked the OSHA vaccine mandate. Last week, they announced that they're going to review a regulation about what is the definition of waters of the United States. They're going to hear a case about EPA's limits to regulate.
Why wouldn't you just give me what I want?
Plants. So, I mean, I think this is going to be a pretty active area for them going forward.
Jerome is in Coachella, California, Democrats line.
Hey, how you doing? Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. My question to him is whether or not he understands that regulations is a key part to capitalism working. You put a sign up, you go and sell an item. People who come, consumers, have to be protected. That's why regulations are there. So when you start talking about reducing regulations, you're talking about not protecting the people. The other point I want to make is that when your analysis comes down, you're valuing people with money. To me, when you go to those type of questioning whether a regulation should be or not, people should not have the same value as money. And that, I remember when the Better Business Bureau, you could go to them.
I changed it.
Worry about your complaint.
It's binary calculators adding zeros. I don't need you to add zeros.
A congressman put some money in his pocket, so he'll vote in favor of that company and not the people.
Okay, Jerome in California.
Yeah, I'll just go back to the point I made earlier, which is I'm certainly not against regulation, and regulation certainly has a viable role in our society. And I don't think anyone actually wants to get rid of all regulation or regulation that's been proven to be effective. But I do think that, a good example, I think, is with these, COVID mandates. We've been trying to figure out what's the right balance between, should people be masking all the time? Should they be masking, when, what are other protocols we should be putting in place? Like, going into the future, we don't know how these things are going to play out. So it's important that agencies take a position that they're willing to learn sort of as they go and adjust the balance of regulation as they need to most benefit society, while also allowing us to have a strong economy.
From Washington, D.C., Democrats Line, this is Marty. Hello.
Yes. I wanted to talk about we want to have a balance with regulation, but finding that sweet spot can be very difficult. But in the meantime, I'm going to give you for instance, when there was emissions control in California, they had some very strict rules because they dealt with a lot of smog. I was in California back in the 70s when they actually had to close down the government buildings because of the smog on a workday. And the car makers, as you know, had agreed to the California rules and did not even want it struck down. But the last administration struck those rules down. Now, you also talk about the process, the elongated process for approving rules. But if you don't have stakeholder input, then you're ignoring the people who are making the goods and services, and they may have valid points. Congress cannot do all of that, all of the research that it takes to get into the details. And so you have to have a process. Now, maybe you can shorten the stakeholder process, but then does that give them enough time to put in their rules and do what they need to do? You haven't yet explained how you're going to try to achieve that process and give everybody the input such that you protect the public and you have one that's effective and efficient and preserve free enterprise.
Okay, Marty, thank you for the call. Marty from Washington, D.C., thank you for the call.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. You certainly raise a great point, is that it takes a long time to go through the rulemaking process. And that's by design. It's supposed to take a long time. Agencies are supposed to be doing sort of the end implementation of the laws that Congress passes. But what has happened is, as Congress is passing fewer laws, the agency has less direction, but they feel like they need to address certain problems, and to an extent, certainly they do. There are problems that need to be addressed, but they don't have the right tools because they're using authorizations that are decades old and weren't designed for the problems that they need to meet today. And so I'm certainly not advocating for getting rid of public input in the regulatory process. I think it's incredibly valuable, and that's probably one of the best features of the rulemaking process. But I think what would help agencies is if Congress gave them a little bit more specific direction on how they're supposed to do some of these things.
To that point, that's reflected as far as a viewer. This is Susie saying, Dear Dan, somewhere there is a good argument for Congress to be more proactive, but where?
Yeah, I think climate change is certainly a prime example. I mean, the fear I have about some of the regulations that are being issued by this administration around climate change is that people will then shrug and say, okay, well, we've done what we can do on climate change. And if you look at how effective regulations are at reducing emissions, because they're done on a sort of a one-off industry basis, they're not nearly as effective as sort of a broader solution that could be implemented more immediately. And so, I would point to that as an example of, where Congress could step in and really help make a difference.
From Nick in Arlington, Virginia, Independent Line. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. So I was thinking that reducing some of the regulations on the oil and gas industry might be a good tool. It's kind of a weapon against Russia and their aggressions in the Ukraine. I was wondering if you balance that against the climate, if it's worth, increasing supply of oil and gas in order to drop the price of gas, if that could be used as an effective weapon, because that was something that they were doing sometime about like 18 months ago. And I know that Russia's economy took a huge hit from that. And if we were to remove some of those regulations, maybe, that could be used as an effective weapon against Ukraine or against Russia.
Nick, thank you.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm certainly not a foreign policy expert, and I don't know, to what extent, removing a regulation today would have an immediate impact on, Russia's decision, of what they're doing in the Ukraine and what they're looking to do over the next several months. Just because, regulations often take a while to be, the impact of either removing or adding a regulation takes a while to be felt. So, I mean, it may be something the administration is considering. I think if they felt that the payoff was worth it, they may consider it. But it may also be a case that it would do too little impact when it's necessary.
From Brian in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Democrats line. Good morning. You're next up.
Good morning. The question I had was about your talk about balancing between costs and benefits. I was wondering if you could elaborate what you mean by cost. Is that all financial, or when you would think about putting in regulations, perhaps you think about humane concerns, and what are the criteria for what your costs are? Is it all based on economic concerns?
Sure. No, not necessarily. I mean, there are sometimes costs that are considered by agencies that aren't monetized, and so there's things like sometimes they put a value on lives and safety and that kind of thing, but often what they'll do is they'll just talk about the obvious benefit that comes from, making sure that people are safe, or, preventing some moral hazards from being introduced into the market. So, agencies certainly try to take those into account. And then, when it comes to benefits as well, they certainly also look at, one of the reasons why we track costs so closely is because agencies don't often provide a similar estimate in the same quantifiable way of the benefits. And that's often because benefits are, less based on economics and more based on values.
One more call. This is Dustin from Wisconsin.
Hi, we've lost 850,000 people in America to COVID. You're talking about less regulations around COVID. I would like to know what those are, and at what point do we need more? How many people dead? Thank you.
Well, I certainly didn't say we need less regulation around COVID. And actually, one of the unique features, I think, of the U.S. government is that a lot of what's being done is dictated by local decision making. So, I mean, a lot of this is up to the state that you live in, or even the municipality. So I'm certainly not advocating for, allowing people to, be more subject to COVID. But a lot of those decisions don't actually fall to the federal government.
Dan Bosch of the American Action Forum. He's the Regulatory Policy Director, AmericanActionForum.org. If you want to read that report and the findings there. Mr. Bosch, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Several events for you to keep an eye on today on the C-SPAN networks, both the House and the Senate in for its regular work. And today at 10 o'clock this morning, a Senate panel taking a look at COVID issues in mental health and substance abuse. You can see that at 10 on C-SPAN 3 online at cspan.org, or watch our full coverage on our C-SPAN Now app. At 10:15, Senate committee nominations. We'll hold a nomination of Shalonda Young to be the Director of Office of Management and Budget, Nani Corraletti to be Deputy Director, 10:15. If you're interested in that, you can see that on C-SPAN online at the .org and our app. And then later on this afternoon, 2:30, the Senate hearing on broadband internet access, a hearing on funding and expanding that funding through the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And you'll hear from Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo testifying before a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee. That will be at 2:30. And if you want to watch it, that will be on C-SPAN 3 as well as the other platforms. That's it for our program today. Another edition of Washington Journal comes your way at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll see you then.
This ought to be interesting.
Good morning. The Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee will please come to order. Today we are holding a hearing on our nation's growing mental health and substance use disorder crisis. I will have an opening statement, followed by Senator Murkowski. She's standing in for Ranking Member Burr for this hearing. and then we will introduce our witnesses. I believe Ranking Member will join us a little later as well. After the witnesses give their testimony, senators will each have 5 minutes for a round of questions. While we were unable to have the hearing fully open to the public or media for in-person attendance, live video is available on our committee website at help.senate.gov, and if you are in need of accommodations, including closed captioning, you can reach out to the committee or the Office of Congressional Accessibility Services. We continue to see a high number of new COVID cases, so we are having this hearing in a larger hearing room where we can be socially distanced, limiting the number of people who are in the hearing room, accommodating both some of our committee members and our witnesses through video, as we have done previously, and taking additional measures such as wearing masks. As always, I appreciate the work from the staff of the Sergeant-at-Arms, the Architect of the Capitol, and our committee clerk and staff to make this hearing as safe as possible. Thank you to all of you. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, our nation was facing mental health and substance use disorder challenges on multiple fronts. Millions of people experienced depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders. Drug overdoses were on the rise, and our health workforce was stretched far too thin. In 2018, mental health issues were responsible for 56 million doctor office visits and 5 million emergency room visits. In 2019, suicide was the second leading cause of death among adolescents. From 1999 to 2019, the rate of overdose deaths more than tripled, and then COVID-19 hit and made things worse. Our nation lost over 100,000 people to drug overdoses in a single year. And overdose deaths, especially deaths involving fentanyl, skyrocketed in my home state during this pandemic. Nationwide, we're also seeing a concerning rise in methamphetamine and cocaine use as well. Across the country, people are stressed, and this pandemic has been especially traumatic for children. Our schools, teachers, and education leaders are seeing this every day. Our educators are on the front lines trying to help so many students experiencing mental health challenges, often without the support of trained mental health professionals. We've seen sharp increases in kids' visits to the emergency room for mental health crises, thoughts of suicide, and suicide attempts, especially among girls. And as of last December, over 167,000 children have had their world shattered after losing a parent or caregiver to COVID-19. Some have even lost both parents. And we know marginalized students are facing the worst of these challenges, deepening inequities they already face. We also know educators and caregivers are facing their own mental health challenges from the strain of this pandemic as well. We need to continue helping our students and educators and ensuring schools have the support, training, and resources they need. But right now, our mental health and substance use disorder workforce is stretched too thin to meet the needs of our kids, let alone our communities at large. And if we just keep stretching without taking action, something is going to break. For example, nearly half of psychologists reported feeling burnt out last year, and we aren't even close to providing mental health care to everyone who needs it. Almost 130 million Americans live in areas with less than one mental health care provider per 1,000 people. In my home state of Washington, our mental health care workforce is only able to meet 17% of our state's needs. Meanwhile, nationwide, less than 1 in 10 people who need treatment for substance use disorder actually get it. And these hardships are not felt equally. The highest increase in opioid deaths recently has been among Black Americans. Rates of suicide are highest among American Indian and Alaska Native populations. And people with developmental disabilities who were already almost 5 times more likely to have mental health needs have had their lives upended. Of course, while some communities may face greater behavioral health challenges, this crisis affects all of us. Even if we aren't personally struggling with mental health or substance use, we all have friends and families who are, whether we realize it or not. We all rely on first responders, healthcare providers, teachers, and other frontline professionals who are facing burnout and trauma. We all have a stake in making sure people can get the help they need. That's why Democrats passed the American Rescue Plan to provide resources for schools to hire counselors and psychologists community-based behavioral health providers, programs to treat mental health, suicide, burnout, and substance use, and more. But we are not done. Healing the scars of this pandemic won't be quick or easy. This will take years, and we must act accordingly. It's time to build on this committee's bipartisan history of expanding access to mental health services and responding to rising drug overdose deaths like we did in 2016 and 2018. In my state, I have seen how communities can benefit from some of the critical programs this committee has worked on, including programs at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. For example, in Clark County, which saw fentanyl deaths triple in 2020, Lifeline Connections is using a SAMHSA grant to better prepare teachers and school personnel, law enforcement, first responders, and caregivers to respond to mental health crises and refer those in need to appropriate treatment. Meanwhile, in King County, federal support has allowed Neighborhood House to provide mental health services for over 150 adults experiencing homelessness. And the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation are using grant funding from SAMHSA to fight the high rate of suicide in their community by updating their health records and mental health procedures, hiring more therapists, and expanding telehealth services, which have been critical to reach people during this pandemic. If we are going to respond to the behavioral health issues this pandemic has made worse, it is clear we have to build on these efforts. That will take legislative action. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how we can do that and working with Senator Burr and everyone on this committee on a bipartisan effort to reauthorize, improve, and expand critical federal programs that address mental health and substance use disorder challenges. I hope that every member of this committee and the Senate can work together to bring their priorities forward to us to include. My goal is to work with Ranking Member Burr to fold these priorities together into a larger package that makes progress on many of the issues that we are going to hear about today, like suicide screening and prevention, youth mental health, the opioids and overdose crisis, and breaking down barriers in access to mental health. Finally, I want to acknowledge that mental health and substance use disorders do not exist in a vacuum. In addition to this pandemic, there are a lot of issues people are worried about right now, from gun violence to climate change to systemic racism to just making ends meet. As we work to do more to help people struggling with depression, anxiety, and stress, we also need to look for ways to solve the problems that are making things so hard for so many people in the first place. And I hope to continue to work with my colleagues on these root causes as well. I'd also like to introduce two letters for the record, one from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the Children's Hospital Association with recommendations for addressing the national emergency in child and adolescent mental health, and the other from members of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, highlighting the importance of supporting the behavioral health workforce. So ordered. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Murkowski for her opening remarks.
Madam Chairman, thank you for convening the hearing. I appreciate that. I also want to thank Senator Burr for asking me to substitute in as ranking member today on this incredibly important and certainly timely conversation as we talk about mental health and substance abuse disorders.
2 papers due
Madam
tomorrow.
Chairman, outlined well, I think the statistics, the challenges that we're seeing, we have known for 4 years now that mental health and substance abuse disorders have really been at crisis levels in many parts of the country, certainly in my state of Alaska, and we have seen those challenges and those issues only further compounded by
Assignment 2 due tomorrow at 11:59.
Access across the country, access to
that means
mental
I'm done
health
for my
and
homework
substance
tonight.
use
Thank
care remains severely limited, exacerbating suicide and substance abuse rates. You've mentioned the statistics in your state, Madam Chairman, with regards to mental health providers and facilities. In Alaska, more than 80% of our communities do not have sufficient mental health providers. Well, again, we are seeing this crisis.
I'll be on for a long time tomorrow, so see you then.